All right, so we are live, and our tweet mechanism, fingers crossed, should have just kicked off. There we go. So here is the link to retweet. I just put that in our internal chat here.
All right, let's go to JS Jabber.
All right, there we are. And okay, so hello everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of JavaScript Jabber Z. On today's I've always wanted to say the Z, but I refrain. I just letting loose today. Today we have with us Steve.
Yo, I'm one of the. I guess I'm one of the zombies in JavaScript Jabber Z. Right? Isn't that like
That's
World War Z? Is that what you're going for?
what more like Vegeta and Gohan, but
Oh,
close.
sorry.
They're kind of undead. They are undead. They are technically undead. They are technically zombies. I'm going to be your well no, host goes last. Okay. And then Kyle at Gitify.
Hello, everyone. Good to be back.
And I am your host today, AJ O'Neill, yo, coming at you from, oh my goodness, I bought this stinky flycatcher thing, and it's stinking up the whole shed, and I've got to have the shed door open. Again.
But does it catch flies?
I that I don't know, but the flies haven't been bugging me, so I think it's working. And obviously, I'm not really a gen. I've been hooked on too much Primogen lately, and so imitation is the serious form of flattery. Anyway, okay, so let's get into this. First question I have for you is, for those of you that don't know, no, even before that, you're now Gitify X. Why did you change from Gitify to Gitify X?
So I still have the Getify account, and I just sort of, I did a switcheroo where I created a new account and then swapped the two usernames so that the followers that used to be on Getify are now on Getify X, but there is still a Getify account, so it's reserved so that nobody else is using it. What actually happened was employment a couple of years ago. The company that I was working for was concerned that that I needed to make sure to represent them, and so, or be clear in my social media representation. So at that time, I switched my Twitter handle from Getify to Getify at, and then the name of that company. And then I worked there for 10 months or something like that. And then I was not working there. And I was going to switch back to just straight up Getify, but then we had already had the rename of Twitter to X. And I was like, oh, well, let's go with this. So I just went back to Getify X. But again, I still have that other Getify account. So one or the other. But I mean, the active one that I'm using is the Getify X account.
Okay, cool. And I think that's how a lot of people know you. But for those that don't know you, how did you get to be so famous, and why don't they know you?
Why? Well, so if we go back to a long time ago in a land far away, mid to late 2000s, like 2007, 8, 9, that time frame, that was kind of the first rise of JavaScript. We'd had frameworks like MooTools and Dojo, and then jQuery came along. And Doug Crockford wrote a book in 2008 called JavaScript: The Good Parts. And we began to see kind of a renaissance reimagining of JavaScript around that time. I had made an earlier bet many years before that I was going to want to be an expert in JavaScript because people are going to want expertise, and that was going to be a good career path. That turned out to be a good bet. But I made that early bet on JavaScript and started focusing on that. And so by that time that JavaScript started to take over in the more public sense, and we started to have, JSConf. I remember in 2009, the first JSConf in DC, we started to have conferences around JavaScript, and there started to be job descriptions around JavaScript. And I had some pretty strong thoughts, having already spent quite a bit of time with the language. I had some pretty strong thoughts about it. So I started trying to participate. The first thing I was known for was a dynamic script loader called Lab.js. That came out in early 2009 and got pretty big, was used on quite a few big sites like Twitter and Vimeo and Zappos and a few others. And so that's kind of the first way that people knew me. You fast forward another couple of years, and all the fame of a tiny 2 kilobyte library had faded. I'm saying that quite tongue in cheek, but that had faded. I had started to do some conference talks around various JavaScript and performance aspects, but I really felt like I had some things I wanted to say about the language itself, and I started writing the You Don't Know JS books, and that is how most people have heard of me. Is the first edition,
6-volume set.
the six volume of the first edition. Second edition is a little more complicated in its status and length, but I came back. So the first edition was released in 2014 and 2015. Then I came back in 2020 and started the second edition. And those are kind of on the shelf now, not really actively being developed, but that's, yeah, two editions of a 6-book series, basically.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, yeah.
Oh, and I should say specifically, just so that people are aware, if you haven't heard me say this before, the title of the book series obviously has several different layers of meaning. There's obviously a bit of a tongue-in-cheek kind of joke about the old You Don't Know Jack trivia game and some other things like that. But it was never intended to be an insulting name the way many people took it. It was actually intended to be a challenge to approach JavaScript with a more open mind and a more active, I'm going to always be learning kind of a thing, which is why the second edition added the word yet to it. You don't know JS yet, because I wanted to make it even more clear that the point of this was actually to kind of be hopeful and to spur people to learn the language more deeply.
Yeah, I totally understood it when it came out, because that I think they just transitioned that to a mobile/TV game where you could scan a QR code or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I totally understood it, but I could also see, as the Twitter sphere has boomed, a lot of the idioms, the English idioms, have gone awry. That things have opened up a lot more. So I okay, all right,
yeah.
And then
it was a response to, again, 2008 and 2009, this Cambrian explosion of JavaScript around libraries. Not a lot of people wanted to learn JavaScript, the language. Everybody wanted somebody's library to do it for them, which sounds a lot like today, actually. But what we had at the time was the JavaScript, the Good Parts book. And that book essentially said, hey, I, Doug Crockford, have surveyed the whole JavaScript language, and I figured out that most of it sucks, but here's this tiny little subset that's really good, and you should learn that. And I really wrote my book series and then the subsequent courses and everything else I've done since as a response to that book. A response to say, I don't think you should learn only a small subset that one guy opinionatedly put a linter for. I think you should learn all of the parts of JavaScript.
It's really unfortunate that you're so wrong there, but I guess we all have our opinions.
Hey man, I've been wrong a lot longer than you were in the industry. I've been around a long time, so I'm all right with that.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the things that we have you on for today was, I saw some tweet that caught my eye about some local first stuff and then later some passkey stuff. And so let's just transition over into talking about that. And it seems really timely. I think when I first saw the tweet, between the time I saw the tweet and we got you scheduled, like it was something that was, in the nicheness of its hype cycle. And now with all these, with DHH making a stir, I think that some of this is actually, maybe local first itself is not on the rise yet, but I think that it's going to lead to being on the rise as people are talking about performance and $5 a month VPSs and whatnot. So, it is.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I can kind of set the scene for everyone around local first. A small little consulting company named Ink and Switch back in, I think, either 2018 or 2019, they coined the term local first, and they put out this little manifesto. It's easy to Google for the 7 principles of local first development. I'm not going to go through all of those. You can read them yourself if you're interested, but I will kind of summarize the one big point of local first, and we'll try to distinguish that because there's a lot of other things that people think it is or isn't. But the main point of local first was to kind of tackle head on this very clear trend that has moved nearly the entire web, and in fact, most of software around it, towards a cloud-centric model. Um, and the tackling, trying to go at this head first, is to say that one of the big problems with a cloud-centric model for architecture is that you make that cloud required, and the cloud, in this very big amorphous sense, is not nearly as ubiquitously guaranteed for every user as we might like to believe. There are a variety of reasons why my version of an app that's on my device and the thing that it needs to talk to up in the cloud might not be able to talk. One, I might have spotty or no internet. Two, there could be some sort of large internet wide or service wide outage in a cloud, routers, DNS.
Bad.
We see those things happen.
Colors.
Yeah, we see these things happen, and I think I personally resonate with. There's actually probably almost half of the internet's users, at least a third to a half of the internet's users, live in parts of the world where both power and internet are not guaranteed unlimited assets. These are resources that are quite constrained, they're metered, they cost a lot, and they basically can't afford, in one way or another, to be constantly cloud connected and constantly sending all of the data back and forth. So what Local First did was it came along and said, the way to start tackling this, one peg of this, is to put data, the source of authority for data should be on a user's device. And by data, we're specifically talking about the data that is relevant to or matters to that user. We're not saying that all trillion gigabytes of Amazon's database needs to be on everybody's phone, but the parts of that they need should be on their device. And most importantly, I would extend that to say the stuff that I create or the stuff that is created about me. That's the stuff that's relevant to me. And that stuff, the source of authority for that data, should be on a user's device. That does not foreclose having cloud servers and having synchronization and all of that, but it shifts the whole mindset to, we start with the user's device and we build up, we progressively enhance from there, rather than starting with the assumption that everything is cloud-based. And if you don't have connection to the cloud, you're dead in the water.
Yeah, I'll give you a little more different example than that. I did some work for a form rendering platform called Form.io a number of years ago, and I've had the founder on here a couple of times. And one of the use cases he gives for local first isn't necessarily speed or bandwidth availability. And their platform had a ability built in where you could do everything locally on your device. And then when you connect to a server and sync up, and the example that Travis gave was a scuba diving company who would be out, they'd be out on a boat out in the water, obviously where you scuba dive unless you're in a pool. And, you want to be able to collect all your customers' information and so on and get it in there. And then when you get back to shore or back within Wi-Fi reach or cell reach or whatever your technology is, then you can sync up with your server and get everything sync up that way. So just another scenario where local first would definitely come into play.
Yeah, definitely the realities of the world being experienced, the computing world being experienced in way more places than in a fixed office space with a fat internet pipe that you're connected to. The world is increasingly more mobile. That's not a unusual thing to assert, but it's increasingly more mobile and increasingly less online. Actually, there's way more of the world that's happening in that spotty part of the internet, and it's been said before that spotty or intermittent internet is actually a much more challenging problem, both for developers and users, than no internet at all. And so I think we definitely we need to embrace the idea that for the web to truly reach all 8 billion people in the world, we have to think about the residency of data being much closer to them. We did have, a brief few years where we said, well, if we just put more servers in more places, and if we hang giant balloons up in the air, and if we have satellite internet, like we'll blanket the world with internet, and that'll be the fix. That's the techno billionaires perspective on things. But I think builders of the web need to embrace this local first principle of making the server, making the cloud optional as opposed to required. And it does bring in a whole, it solves a bunch of things, but it brings in a different set of problems. And you mentioned those, the synchronization questions, and the whole concept of synchronization, data structures like CRDT, that's now a big thing of discussion, where that used to just be a niche academic topic. But we have got dozens of companies that are trying to build commercial solutions around sophisticated synchronization mechanisms when you have data on a device that needs to synchronize with other devices and with cloud servers.
So how much does the local first approach, I guess it really doesn't, maybe it does exacerbate a little bit, is the performance issue. So, obviously the issue with JavaScript versus a server-side language is that since it's run in the browser, that code has to be all downloaded to your browser. And so there's the ongoing issues that developers face with trying to make their code, whether it's using a framework or not, as minimal as possible, so that for your third world countries, for your places where there's a poor connection, maybe only 3G instead of 5G, et cetera, you've got less to download. So now you're adding a bunch more data to what you're downloading because you're stashing it locally. So that's going to make, I guess that would make your on-device performance when it's actually using the code faster, because you're not having to make your API calls to your server, but at the same time, then you got to sync all that up. So it seems, so as I ramble on here, I guess you could say it's sort of minimizing that and making it less of an issue because you don't have all the data flowing back and forth as much as you do with JavaScript, or is that a non-issue?
Generally speaking, I think a local first app reduces the amount of data in totality that needs to go back and forth across the wire, but it may very well, in fact, front load more of that data transfer, especially if you're synchronizing an existing user history onto a new device. There definitely might be more download, not only download of the application itself, because that's another thing. Like if I have the app, I really should have a continuing to work app, even if I have no internet, right? That's the offline first part of this, which is only part of the umbrella. But I should have an app that continues to function, even if the internet connection to the web server is down or, non-existent because they went out of business. I should be able to keep using that. So there very well might be a trade-off here where the initial experience is a little bit more like an app install experience that is not instant on. And I personally think that would be better for the web, to go back to not trying to fake the instant on experience, and instead embrace the idea that I'm, not websites, but if I'm choosing to install an app, it really should be a thing that I'm willing to wait 3, 5, 10, 20 seconds, whatever it takes, to get the whole app and whatever data I need synchronized onto my device. You could take a page out of Google Chrome's book, and put little, dinosaur jumping games in there while you're waiting. I mean, we can go back to the days where we had, better experiences than just those dumb spinners that can engage people and let them do things. But another point to this is that a local first experience should work even if you don't yet have your data. So honestly, maybe having an instant on experience as soon as you get the code you should be able to start creating data, even if all of the data that it's going to merge with has not yet downloaded. So I think there's a lot of complexity in terms of those trade-offs, but it is being intentional about saying that users should be able, once they have a piece of data and they have an app to work on that data, they should be able to continue to do what that code and data enabled, no matter what, from here on forward. My best
Okay.
use case to describe this, it's just one personally, but when we think about bank account apps, generally people think about bank accounts as the only use cases. I want to know right now, instantaneously, what is my current available balance in my bank account. But there's a tremendous amount of information in my bank account that has nothing to do with what the latest thing that I bought at the grocery store is. And that data is on my device. I can see it, I can interact with it, I can search it. Except when my internet goes away, now all of that's completely gone. I can't go back and look at what I bought at the grocery store last week, because they make the assumption when they build the banking app that the only way that I want to use this app is to see current instant. If they can't give me that, they don't give me anything. Well, that's bonkers, I think. That's my data, very clearly my data. And I have an app that's able to render and work with that data. So a local first app would say, you can continue to look at all of your previous bank account transactions and read them and search them and categorize them and do whatever you want, even if you don't have an internet connection to look at your live account balance. That's, I think, what we're missing, is that we just assume that live everything is the only use case that matters, when actually there's a ton of use cases that don't require that live connection.
All right, so I'm going to push back on this.
Great.
And I actually, like, morally, I agree with you. But practically, we have to look at what the reality of the situation is. So most web businesses are not profitable businesses. They are growth businesses. The way that people make money is that for the first 10 years or so, they just hand off the business from one investor to another as they go through seed round this, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, and then after $13 billion, maybe they become profitable, but most likely they just flounder. So why would anybody care about the people in these spotty internet areas? Because they have no money to pay for the product. So in terms of growth users, like, yeah, I guess you could make an argument for, say, yeah, there's a lot of people out there with spotty internet. You could get them onboarded as users if you're the only one that's actually trying to onboard these users, but then you can never count them in a metric as like potential customers. So
yeah, I totally disagree with that. I think that's a complete false dichotomy, that people with spotty internet have no money. There's lots of use cases that we can imagine. You were referring, we talked a little while ago about the diving company that's out. That's a high-end hobby that people are spending a whole lot of money on, and they just happen to be in an area where they don't have internet at that moment where they're collecting and experiencing the data. There's use cases around construction and survey companies that are out in the field and they're nowhere near where internet is. They're collecting tons of really useful and very expensive data that they need to sell to other people or synchronize with their company. But we don't even have to get into the big companies. There are like literally millions and millions of people in the world, tens of millions of people in the world, who are a one-man, one-woman business, a one-person business. The fish farmer in somewhere rural, they may be collecting hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of product that they're going to take to market. They are very much somebody that you can monetize and treat as a customer. But when they're out there collecting all of those fish and they're not yet at the market with it, they're not somebody who has internet, but they still absolutely have tons of potential and should be treated as a valuable customer. And that's not to even get into the larger moral question of, we ought to treat everybody's access to the internet as an important human right, I believe, as opposed to only a right that comes if you're willing to pay for it. But
I don't know that I agree about the human right, but I agree. Yeah, sorry.
It's all right. Go ahead.
I was just saying, I disagree that it's a human right. It's something that's very modern. It's something that's only existed for literally decades out of thousands of years of human history. So to call it a human right is on a like that's a bridge too far for me. But
Okay.
I agree. Like, I would love a world that is like what you're saying. I get frustrated all the time. I mean, living here in Utah, things have gotten a lot better in the past 10 years, but it used to be sometimes when I was going between cities, because there's these little cities like uh, Mapleton or Pleasant Grove is kind of booming, but they were really small, you know, and so I'd be going between cities and not having phone like really good phone reception back when I was in college. Now it's, you know, the because of all the tech booms that have happened, like all the pastures are being bought up and turned into business parks. A lot of them are just sitting there empty, but you know, they're there nonetheless. And yeah, so it's a bit better. So I like that idea, but I think it's a hard sell to talk with someone and say, hey, if you're actually a legitimate startup trying to be profitable, how are you going to spend all this extra time to do something that's not an industry standard? There is no playbook for it, which I guess maybe that's part of what you're trying to fix. And um, and these are one-off experiences from, you know, the 1% of your customers. And let's say that we agree these are actually going to be customers, not users. But, you know, they're the 1%ers, or it's the one time they're out there. You know, they don't have another option anywhere. They're really going to be that upset that, okay, while they're skydiving, they can't use your app. I mean, maybe it's not safe to use the app while skydiving.
There's another angle that I think we should point out, which is there's plenty of um, justification to attract businesses to create apps in this way that really has nothing to do with whether they ever charge their user anything, right? There's tons of apps out there that never charge a penny to any of their customers. They're just selling their data, they're selling them advertising or whatever. And there's plenty of reasons why those companies can benefit from local first apps. One of the biggest reasons is that if you long term reduce the amount of churn of data going back and forth across the wire, in fact, potentially, you might even completely eliminate the need for these big centralized stores of your data. You drastically reduce the footprint that you need in the cloud, perhaps even to zero, but certainly significantly less. Are there
But
things that you'll still always do in the cloud? Yeah, you'll host giant video files and other CDN things. You'll do really complex compute out in the cloud with AI training. But there's a ton of the generalized CRUD stuff that we do out in the cloud right now because it seems easiest to do it there. And we pay tons of money to those cloud providers to do that. There's a lot of that that can actually be shifted to the user's devices. We see potential growth in peer-to-peer device communications through various different protocols, both web and native, that can reduce the stress and the footprint that you need in the cloud. And like we were mentioning in the pre-show, people like DHH, you know, and the 37 Signals folks and the things that they're doing, they're not bastions of the, or, you know, they're not leaders in the local first community per se, but what they are saying is, hey, is the cloud really required, or can the cloud actually be optional? Or are there other architectures there where we can move back down to, you have an app, you own the app, you host the app, and you host your data? And I think that's going to lead to companies starting to ask those questions. Wait a minute, do I really need to pay hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of dollars to a cloud provider when I could offload a lot, if not all, at least a lot of what I was doing and reduce the cost? I think there's a huge business benefit to embracing local first. And just like with any other movement, you said it's true, it's early, it's nascent, there's not a lot of standard, but that offers huge upside potential for the companies that decide to be early movers in that space. And it's always been the case that early movers have had huge upside potential. Yes, huge risk, but huge upside potential that comes with it.
okay, so one thing that I think is pretty well established, and I would love to be corrected on this, but I think it's pretty well established that state management is more difficult on the front end than it is on the back end. Like, it's a higher level of abstraction. There's more things that you're not in control of that can go wrong. State management on the front end is a nightmare. And React came in and promised, like, you don't have to worry about state management anymore because we're just going to re-render the whole page. And we've seen how that's gone. You know, it's not been like this shining star of, oh, state management's not a problem anymore. It's been another game of hot potato where, well, actually we do need state management, but it's going to live in this component. Not actually, it's going to live in this library. Actually, we're going to put it back on the server. Actually, we're going to stream it down to the client. And you know, it seems like every 6 months to a year and a half, 6 to 18 months, React completely gets a whole fundamental redesign. And then instead of calling it some other framework, they just call it React 17 or 18
the
or
next
you know.
version.
Right, yeah. Which is like one of the most, that's like the best brand thing that has ever happened in the universe in terms of front-end frameworks. Release a completely different framework that shares almost none of the principles of the previous one other than the syntax and call it the same thing. Right. But with that said,
it's working for the companies that are behind React.
How in the heck are people supposed to, they can't even figure out what they're doing right now, right? Like they can't even figure out the state management problems that they have right now. How are they going to handle all the additional state management problems of local first? And maybe there's a snuck premise there that needs to be disbanded, but like,
yeah. So here's what I would say. First of all, a tremendous amount, not all, but a tremendous amount of the current complexity in modern front ends is directly related to the choice that we made to centralize architecture on a cloud first model. And then also try to tell everybody, even though all of that data and all of that code lives not on your device, but out in the, in the ether somewhere, we're going to make it look as if it's as close to instant on as possible. Those two things have conspired together to create an entire multi-billion-dollar industry of web performance optimization. And
yeah,
literally dozens and dozens of these complexities that you're talking about. Most recently, the shift back to server-side components and server-side blah, 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 whatever. Most of that, I think, is chosen complexity, not necessary complexity, but it's been a choice that we've been continuing down that route. And Local First says, actually, much of that, not all of it, but much of that is not actually necessary. If the code is resident on somebody's device, if we build an experience where it's very durable and very stable, instead of it's constantly changing every 5 minutes on every page load, a durable and stable experience, and we put the data where somebody needs it to reduce the amount of the need of all of that back and forth. What you're basically doing is you're saying all of the complexity that we have around eventual consistency, which is, I think, one of the worst terms we ever invented as technologists, because there's absolutely no consistency anywhere. It's a total farce. It's a never consistency model. If you think about what is the source of authority for Amazon's e-commerce database, there are literally hundreds of thousands of sources of authority for Amazon's database. There is no one snapshot that says this is the true source of truth for what's going on with Amazon as a business. So what we're saying is they already have the built-in complexity of managing effectively with CRDTs, very bespoke, internal to their business logic in their cloud backends. They're already having to deal with massive amounts of complexity of all of that state management. And I think that's the hidden complexity that you weren't talking about. We have all this front-end complexity, but the balance of that is all of that hidden complexity in our backends. And we have tons of giant frameworks and messaging systems and all that try to manage all that stuff, database architecture complexity with replication and all of that. And basically, Local First is saying we could eliminate most of that if we stopped trying to pretend that the only way for this experience to happen is to require a round trip. We can have round trips when we need them, but we don't have to require that to gate the user's experience. We can install an experience for them. We can put data there that they need most frequently, and we can put the logic there that makes that data do what that user expects and stores whatever they've changed, and then in the background synchronizes that to wherever it needs, whether that's peer-to-peer to another device, or whether it's through a traditional sending some synchronized data back up to a cloud server, which is what many of them are doing. But we're just simply saying that user does not have anywhere near that amount of complexity. So this is a very different way of building applications. Does it have its own complexity? Of course it does. Nobody's saying this is the silver bullet and it's just 2 lines of code and it's all done. But I actually think if we went forward 5 years and then were to take a really good local first app, and there are several out there, Linear and some of those others, if we were to take their code bases and compare them to the equivalent cloud-centric code bases, I really do genuinely believe that the overall complexity, the overall number of moving parts goes down when you embrace these principles.
Okay, I would love to agree with you. I'd need to see how, because again, I'm just hung up on fundamentally caching on the front end is front end people are asked to do too much. They're expected to do CSS, which is essentially a design mindset, or they're copying design. They're either creating or copying design in CSS. They're expected to understand the DOM, which is very engineer oriented data internals to event loops in a browser and rendering processes. And they're expected to also be a programmer in JavaScript, where they need to have developed the acumen for writing programs. And these three things are literally, they're all opposed to each other. CSS has nothing to do with programming. Honing your skills at CSS means that you have to give up honing your skills somewhere else, like in programming, JavaScript. Honing your skills and your understanding of browser mechanics and eventful paints and the DOM APIs, all that C++ context switching, that's systems level programming, and that's very different from application level programming. And so, like, front end developers are just being asked to do too much, and I think that's why they're failing. And asking them to then also be good at data transformations and ETL, I think it's too much because they're already burdened. Either we need to split up and say, you're a front end programmer and you're a front end designer, or you're a front end programmer and you're a front end layout manager, or whatever, so that they can actually focus and become good at those areas of skill and really be excellent. Or we have to somehow provide something to reduce the complexity, which again I think is the allure of React, because it's kind of saying, okay, we're going to take care of the CSS and we're going to take care of the DOM lifecycle, and we're going to take care of obscuring away the the JavaScript or this new the RSX, no, what is JSX language, so it just seems like there's a lot there, and I want it to happen. I'm just very skeptical. Show me the path. How do we add more data manipulation on someone's plate and make their life simpler?
So what I think is really going to happen is the providers that are currently in the local first space that are trying to push for these synchronization engines and these rather sophisticated CRDT mechanisms for, there's actually a lot more to. It's not simply, last change wins. There's a whole lot of complexity about merging changes in a live changing system across device and all of that. And there's a lot of different trade-offs that are being made. And so the people that are designing those engines are starting, at least from what I can see. I'm talking about things like Replicache and a few others that are out there. So there's some things that you can Google. There's a number of solutions out there in the local first space. And what many of them that I've talked to or heard from are saying is, we do actually have quite a bit of industry experience around building the backend logic that knows how to talk to ORMs that are backed by relational databases. So if we can build the replication logic and the merging logic into those types of abstractions, we don't have to get people to learn an entirely new way of programming that type of what we would call backend logic. And I'm using the air quotes around backend because I'm going to self-service myself here for a minute and call back to a term that I invented back in 2009 and 2010 called middle end. What sits between the front end and the back end is the middle end. The way I originally conceived of the middle end was it was all the plumbing in the bottom 10% of your front end application and all of the plumbing that was in the top 10% on your server, and what makes those two things work together and talk together, whether that be templating or caching or headers or session management or any of the data formatting, validation, all that stuff. That's what I call the middle end. Well, what I think is going to happen with local first is that there will in fact be a specialty. Whether we call it middle end and I get any credit for it remains to be seen, but I think there will be a specialty for the back of the front developer or the middle end developer who builds a significant portion of the back end of that application. They move it out of what they would traditionally host in a cloud server and they put it into the app, and they build it around these abstractions, like being able to make relational database queries in an app. And even if that, like you have a SQLite in the client, because we can now do that. We can, with the advent of WASM, we can do all kinds of things. So we can literally have a SQLite client in the app. And that's what a lot of these companies are doing, is basically saying, let's layer an ORM on top of an actual database so that I'm writing data into a SQLite on the device. And I'm also replicating those write changes in the data off to a relational, database that may or may not be SQLite up in a cloud server, but they're using that ORM layer to do this. I think a lot of that complexity that you're worried about will be built around that. That's my prediction. And I think that there will be people who will really like that because they feel really comfortable in that. And now they'll be able to move a lot of those same skills into the back of the front or the middle end development in local first. I think there will be some people who will hate that and say SQL sucks and relational databases suck and we shouldn't use that. But that's why we're going to have lots of different options, right? So you may have a group of providers that choose to build that around relational databases, and others that are going to make something that's going to look a little bit more like GraphQL, a little bit more freeform. I think we'll see that and a half dozen others that I haven't conceived of yet. But I don't think you will ask app developers to start becoming experts on the deep academic theory around CRDT. I think that's what these providers are going to solve. They're getting close to solving, and they're working on hard trying to solve.
So you touched on one issue there, and that's the term of the local data storage. I think the default, at least the one I always hear thrown around first, is SQLite or SQLite, because this tool has been around forever, and it's very, very easy to use to embed within an application and store local data. So my question is, do you see tooling around other kinds of databases that can be used locally? So one that comes to mind is for a document database such as MongoDB. If somebody were to use that on the back end, I could see how that could be very difficult to convert between a SQLite structure on the local and then a Mongo database on the back end.
I probably wouldn't recommend that.
I would not recommend it either, considering how I work with Mongo every day. That would be hellish. So
I'd say the two things that I see right now in the client space are SQLite and Postgres. There's a Postgres-Lite client that's been compiled to WASM. You can use the Postgres SQL flavor if you like, or the SQLite SQL flavor if you like. But those are the two major players for highly structured data. I would argue that if you need unstructured, non-relational data storage, we already have that in the form of IndexedDB and JSON objects and things like that. We don't need a MongoDB ORM on top of JSON objects if you don't need the relational. So I think the reason why we get big, powerful engines like a SQLite or Postgres-Lite being compiled to the browser is for all that relational stuff that's pretty hard for people to go and invent themselves. But if you're really talking about kind of document level storage stuff, there's already actually a pretty good and solid way of storing data. We have not only the IndexedDB, but a lot of people don't realize we actually have fully cross-browser the Origin private file system, where you can create files and store arbitrary data. And both
is this true?
It is absolutely true. I've written a library around it, so it's absolutely true.
I'm gonna fact check this.
Okay, please do. If you get both IndexedDB and OPFS, the Origin Private File System, both of those have essentially up to about 2/3 of the device's disk space that the browser makes available to them. So in the old days when we had like local storage and it was limited to 5 megabytes and nobody could even imagine doing anything like, like a real apps backend on those things. Now that we have IndexedDB and OPFS, and both of them have very solid access to disk space, and I just we're going to see a big explosion of people building real data storage in the client as opposed to kind of stuffing some stuff in local storage the way it used to be. And I think a lot of people didn't realize that happened, but OPFS is absolutely already happened. There are complexities around it, but you can work around those with libraries, which again, that's what I've worked on.
So let's touch on
Okay.
IndexedDB real quick, just by way of explanation, since I always like to, or don't like to assume that everybody knows when we're talking about a tool. So, if I'm, just looking at the MDN page on Index, it sounds like it is now. Is the actual storage, the files, is that in the browser or just stashed locally on your OS somewhere on your device?
Yeah. So IndexedDB, again, fully cross browser, has been around for almost 10 or 15 years now. So it's definitely a reliable system. It's not new like OPFS. It's been around for a long, long time. So IndexedDB is kind of like back in the day, we had both IndexedDB and we had WebSQL. They were both trying to vie for the structured data storage in the client model. IndexedDB has a whole bunch of complexity around it, and WebSQL was like a higher level, SQLite type of interface. And a lot of people said, I don't really like the IndexedDB. So there was this favoring of WebSQL in the early days. But there were some browsers that basically said, we're absolutely not going to ever do WebSQL, like Firefox. We're not doing WebSQL. We're only doing IndexedDB. And so whether it was the better of the two options is kind of irrelevant because browsers just sort of decided for us that the thing that we got was IndexedDB, and everybody then agreed and just did it. Now, IndexedDB, again, pretty low level API, a lot of complexity around, transactions and other things like that. I don't even use IndexedDB in that sense. There's a library called IndexedDB KeyVal, IDB-KeyVal, that creates a literal key value storage abstraction on top of IndexedDB. It's got millions of downloads. It's hugely popular. I've never dealt with IndexedDB other than to use that library. So I look at IndexedDB as a really powerful key value store.
Do you know how it compares to local forage?
I do know some of the history behind local forage, but the most important thing to point out about local forage is that, as far as I'm aware, it's no longer maintained. IDB KeyVal is actually actively maintained. It's Jake Archibald that built that library. It's an actively maintained library and still gets a lot of usage.
Old friend.
Local forage hasn't been maintained for quite a while, I think. So.
Okay, yeah, I've noticed that there's some issues there. Okay, I'll have to try this out next time.
So in any case, that explains what IndexedDB is. Been around a long time, stabilized, and there are a variety of libraries, local forage, IDB KeyVal, and others that make working with IndexedDB not as painful as its native API is. A lot of people use IndexedDB for that, I would make the case that IndexedDB should be the default client data storage over local storage, not only because it has larger disk space access, but also because IndexedDB can actually be accessed from workers and done asynchronously, where local storage and session storage cannot be accessed from worker threads. So that makes it a more flexible data storage. Now with OPFS, the origin.
I gotta fact check you.
Okay.
I do not see baseline support for OPFS.
Okay. So there's a lot of complexity around OPFS. There's a narrow layer that we're drawing here. OPFS has a variety of ways that people can envision using it. I'm going to talk about it in ways where you want to access existing files on the user's system, like something off of their desktop. There's that usage of OPFS. And that does not have baseline support and might not ever, because there's still a lot of security considerations around it. But
Okay.
there's the virtual private file system of OPFS, which is a reserved area of disk space that you can read and write files into, and it's origin locked. That actually got much more widespread consensus among the browser vendors, but there was performance concerns around it. So people wanted an OPFS interface where they could do easy kind of synchronous reads and writes from it. And there were performance concerns about you can't do synchronous reads and writes on the main thread because that could block things and whatever. And so what we got was this bifurcation where there was an asynchronous API that you could use from the main thread. And that one also has not yet achieved this sort of baseline parity because notably Safari does not support that main thread asynchronous API. However, all of the browsers did implement the synchronous read and write from workers. So if you're willing to take on the complexity of burying your storage logic inside of a worker, you actually can do OPFS with synchronous reads and writes across all the major browsers. I would argue that is actually baseline in that subset. That's
Well, I mean, we can see if it's baseline because it'll have the sticker baseline on it on MDN and the other sites that catalog these.
I'm just saying that there's the nuance and complexity may or may not be captured there in the way that they're messaging this, which is whether or not you're using the asynchronous API or whether you're relying upon the synchronous API and doing it in a worker. This narrow do it with synchronous APIs in a worker is actually I've tested it. It works on all these mobile devices and desktop browsers. So that I think
am super interested. Will you drop? Okay. Agreed. Because the baseline is pretty broad. Baseline typically applies to the entire specification, except in the case of passkey where it only applies to one item and half of the options. You and I have both had fun with that one.
Yes, we have. Yeah.
So drop a link to some resource for that, please, because
just so what I'll do is
comments.
What I'm going to do is actually drop a link. I've referred to this a couple of times, but I'm going to drop a link to a library that I recently wrote, which tries to abstract client-side storage, gives you a key value abstraction across all 5 of the major client storage mechanisms. There's cookies, which people don't often think of as client storage, but you can actually read and write key values and cookies. There's local storage and session storage. There's IndexedDB and there's OPFS. And that library supports both the OPFS in the main thread, but then, it doesn't support all browsers. Or there's also the worker version of that, which does work in more browsers. You just have to be willing to do some of the reasons why people don't like worker-based logic is because it can make more complex your security headers, like your CSP policy on a site or things like that. You have to be a little more careful. But if you're willing to go down that route, you can use OPFS in all of the stable versions of all the major browsers and devices today. And so I'll drop a link to the storage library that I wrote that tries to just give you a very easy, consistent key value abstraction across all of those.
So my understanding is the way that works in practice is that you create a main thread API that resembles closely the worker thread API. It transforms data into a buffer and then sends it as a shared buffer object across the worker thread, and then the worker thread sends it back as a shared buffer object, and then it gets re-encoded. Is that the basic cycle of that?
So sharing data between workers is actually a bit of a complex thing, and it's unfortunate that it is so complex. But sharing data between workers can either be serializing to a string and sending that string of data across the interprocess channel, or this newer standard of these transferable objects. In transferable objects, it's a more complex programming paradigm, but it is effectively that you stuff some data in a typed array, and then you tell the browser, I'm relinquishing control of this typed array to a thread, and I can no longer read from it while that thread has control of the typed array. and then the thread now instantly has access with 0 copy to that same shared memory, and it can read from that typed array, the literal binary data from it, can read the bits from that, do whatever it wants, write back to it, and then relinquish control back to the main thread. That's what transferable, like being able to transfer things. Most people don't go that route unless they have massive amounts of data that they're trying to send. And by massive, I mean like 100 megabytes or more. Most people,
Yeah, I think
when they're
Papa
sending data back and
Parse-
forth, are just serializing to JSON and sending it across.
I think that Papa Parse was maybe the first widely known popular library that took advantage of these tricks because it's supposed to be able to handle, gigabyte CSV files.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Yeah.
know. Do you know of anything else that's in that vein? Because that's my experience with worker threads is pretty much Papa Parse and a couple of failed experiments.
I don't know Papa Parse. I haven't used that one. I don't think I've ever used any worker libraries. I've always just used the direct worker interface that we get in the browser. So I don't have any specific recommendations to make around that.
Okay.
But like this library that I'm posting this link to, you could look at that code. It's only like a couple dozen lines of code. You could look at the code of how I'm managing those workers, and you could very easily write an adaptation of that instead of sending the data across in JSON, did so with a more sophisticated, transferable, or bury it in a binary array and a typed array into a transferred object kind of thing. You could do that. It wouldn't be that hard.
Okay. All right. Well, this has been really interesting so far. I want to check in real quick. Steve, how are we at on time?
If considering what else we want to talk about, we should probably move on.
Okay. I mean, do we want to wrap this segment up?
Oh, I see what you're saying. No, we can move into the next one. I can go about 20 minutes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Got it. All right. Cool. So I forget the track that we were on. Since I forgot anyway, I actually want to go back a little bit, and we've thrown around some terms that it seems like recently what I'm picking up is that people are using these terms in different ways. And so let's like huge step back. Let's define cloud, because cloud meant I have a VPS on Linode. That's what cloud meant. What does cloud mean now?
I mean, cloud basically means now that you're using a managed hosting solution with built-in scalability. So you're using something like AWS or Google Cloud Platform, or maybe Azure from Microsoft, using one of those big cloud providers. And you're basically allowing those managed services to do all of the provisioning, the spinning up and down of your servers. You're not really doing a lot of that manually, although you could, AWS has a dashboard. You could go in and take down a server or put up a new one if you wanted, but you're basically creating these policies so that it's managing your scale and your growth for you. I don't have any more understanding of cloud than what I just said. That is the sum total knowledge, because I never got into that space. There's probably listeners here who would have a very different and much more detailed view of the cloud. But what I understand the cloud, because I have a VM on Linode, right? And I don't call that the cloud. I'm paying for a virtual machine, but I do all of my own management. And there's no built-in scalability where I get a new VM just because I get, Slashdotted or at the homepage of Reddit or something. I have to manage all of that stuff. So I don't call that the cloud, because they're not really doing anything for me. I'm just renting a bit of memory and CPU cycles from them.
So low cloud VPS, middle cloud auto scaling, but then there's high cloud, which is serverless functions.
Sure. Yeah. Cloudflare with, with their durable objects, and we've got, functions as the fast functions as a service, and AWS Lambda and all of that stuff. That would be, I think that's fair to call that a higher abstraction of cloud.
Because right now on Twitter, it seems like whenever people are saying cloud in references particularly to all this DHH stuff, they actually specifically mean functions. They don't mean the auto scaling. They don't mean like it seems like they are strictly talking about just functions. And that was confusing to me because, like I said, while I've heard the term cloud, it's gone from meaning I don't host the server in the closet at the office, I co-locate it, or I use just a portion via VM, to now it means like it seems like it means anything that marketers want it to mean at the moment.
Yeah.
And public
I think
then
it's I
people
think it's
talk
important
past
to
each
note.
other.
I think it's important to note there. I think there's a very important distinction between a VM that I am responsible with the root login to manage and take down and reboot and upgrade and all of that stuff, versus a fully managed service where I don't even know what my VM is. I've just given you like Docker images and I've said, please just go spin up whatever servers I need out of that stuff. Those are very different system admin thought processes, and they take very different skill sets. So I think there's a distinction there to be made, and I would call the latter of those cloud, versus you use the term co-locate. I mean, I was doing that back in 1997 in college. I was running a server in my apartment in college, and then I remember the day that I was like, yeah, I can't do this anymore, and I went and like bought a 1U server and stuck my hardware in a data center somewhere. That certainly was not the cloud, because I was still completely responsible for that server. They just gave me a power plug and an Ethernet plug.
All right. So then on to the next thing. Well, there kind of two things maybe. So I want to know what is the alternative, because we talked about, okay, people are going to have this data locally, and I agree there's some efficiencies there. There's also some inefficiencies, especially on Android devices, due to the single core speed and JSON parsing from local storage or IndexedDB actually becomes significant a lot quicker than most people would think. But like there's a potential, there's certainly bandwidth savings. There's definitely potential performance savings, although a lot of the critics of that have, I believe a lot of their points are valid, but like you were saying, it's like, what layer are you viewing at this? If it's time to first contentful paint, but the person still can't click a button, well, then you're just lying to the user. You didn't actually do anything better. And then, so what is the alternative to the cloud in terms of how the data is going to work? It doesn't seem like WebRTC is really there yet, but what's the alternative? And then what are the places, how do we distinguish between the places where local first makes sense and local first doesn't make sense? Because it sounds like to me, Amazon or Walmart search would never make sense. Bank access and email access seems like that would always make sense. And Twitter would be somewhere in between. So give me your take in that, given that context.
These are fair questions, and I'll acknowledge that lots of different perspectives are going to exist on this. So I'm only giving my one little slice of perspective. But I actually do think that probably the lion's share of applications should move local first. And I personally feel that way, because not only do we have the description, the discussion that we had earlier about the business model and whether users can monetize and whether there's like a business justification for local first. That's part of the equation. That's not what brought me to local first. What brought me to local first was actually a personal conviction around the importance of the autonomy of users owning their own identity, taking that with them wherever they go, and owning their data. I make the assertion in a couple of different meetups and conference talks recently that data that you don't physically control is data that you don't own. In other words, custody of data is the whole game. If I have data that theoretically is mine, but it's actually physically in the custody of a cloud server that's behind some business model of a company that I don't own and control, then that's no longer my data. I'm renting that data back. And I believe,
but that's the ransom. That's why they give you the first 10 years for free.
Exactly. They get you hooked, just like any good drug dealer does. I genuinely believe that most of the web needs to move to a model where users have that autonomy over their identity and over their data. And I believe that local first is the only compelling model for us moving in that direction right now. Are there challenges with local first? Of course. Is it so nascent that it's unlikely to win? I mean, I think we have to concede that most challenges to the status quo of billion-dollar businesses don't win. I think we have to concede that. We've had a whole other sphere, which we're not even talking about here. We've had this Web3 crypto movement that for 15 years has been saying we're the answer to that. I actually worked at a Web3 company for a while, and they've said we're the answer to all of that centralization and give everybody their stuff. I worked for a Web3 company, and for that 6 months was like continually confronted by how easy it was for people in that space to just grin and blink away the big gap between the way the web is currently built and the way users currently experience that and what Web3 is. And so I left there thinking, I don't know if we're ever going to get to Web3. But if we're ever going to get anywhere forward, we need to evolve the web. And I started calling it Web 2.5, where the web goes to more of a users own their data, users own their identity. The experiences are more installed rather than accessed on every run. Like, every time you go to a web page, you're effectively reinstalling that web app. And that's bonkers because we wouldn't treat native apps that way, where every single time we opened up or clicked a button in an app, we re-downloaded the whole app or even part of the app.
But this is the allure of React, right? This is the same problem. Like the state management's hard, the upgrade path is hard, diffing the data is hard. We're just going to redo the whole thing from top to bottom.
So first of all, I don't think we're redoing the whole thing, because if you build local first apps with web technology, you can build
what I meant by redoing is
but
re-rendering, reloading. But
we could do multiple episodes on whether or not the virtual DOM was a good thing for us, or whether it really took us, I think it was very much let's climb a local maxima hill. And we got to the very top of that local maxima hill, and then we're like, oh, this sucks. This isn't the right hill to climb. But that's my personal take on the virtual DOM and DOM diffing and all of, re-render every 15 milliseconds or something.
But the basic concept, what I'm saying is the basic concept is state is hard, let's not do it. That was the allure. State is hard, let's not do it. We're going to re-render the whole thing so we don't have to keep track of individual state. We don't need to know what the state of this button is.
There's no app in existence that is using React that is not doing sophisticated state management alongside of React. So it's total bullshit.
I know
that state doesn't exist.
Well, pardon your French.
Sorry.
No, I'm there with you. I'm just saying that that's the allure, and there is something to that. Like, I think I've taken a look at Swift UI, and I think Android Jetpack is the same. In Swift UI, if I close my eyes and I listen to the conference talk, I hear React, 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 React. But when I open my eyes, I see something that it's like, this looks like it actually solves the problem. Which is like really surprising, because it's like, I've abhorred React so much, but Swift UI is something that's really intriguing to me. How can these two things be? And I don't know. There's the promise, there's what's on the conference slide, and then there's the implementation. And I think when you look at something like Swift UI, it's the same promise, but I think they might have the implementation right. I don't have enough experience with it to say, but I think they might.
The thing I would point out is that the only thing that's really significant in the front-end development space over the last couple of years that is somewhat antithetical to the local first movement is the move to server-side rendering of components and that whole complexity. All the other things that and as I argued earlier, they only did that because they keep trying to chase this mythical 0 millisecond reinstall experience that product managers and people have just sold as a reality that isn't. They're trying to get closer and closer to pretending as if the app can reside in both places at the exact same time and there's no cost over the wire. If you didn't ever start with that as your goal, which I never did, then you wouldn't have ever gone down the road of trying to do server side component rendering and all of that stuff. That wouldn't have been the way you tried to fix it. And local first fixes it in different ways that I think are much less complex. And so that's really the only thing that's happened in the last few years of development that you might have to abandon if you really wanted to embrace local first. You would have to kind of get away from that server side component way of thinking that people are starting to get excited about and enjoy. But all of the other things that you could bring, like you can bring a straight up React 15 virtual DOM application straight to local first. You can do what I do, which doesn't even use the front end frameworks. I use templating, and I'm super old school, but I use mustache templates. And you can do that. You can use reactive things like Vue, and their signals in Svelte. You can do any of those things for local first development. The only thing you can't do is offload significant amounts of your front end logic to a back end, because you really need to stick that back end on the client to embrace what local first is about.
Okay, so this here, I just bounce an idea off. The promise of GraphQL, but delivered as a local API. Because the allure of GraphQL was GraphQL is going to handle the data manipulation for you. GraphQL, and I think that the ETL, the extract, transform, load, the syncing of data, the transforming logic, I believe that is classically a back-end task. We could call it the middle end, and I'm 100% on board with your classification of the middle end. There's like the core API, the JSON, where things kiss. That's the middle end. And that's the problem that GraphQL was kind of trying to solve. If you move GraphQL's complexity to the middle end, and you give people that are purely on the front end the autocomplete of GraphQL with local storage, I think maybe it wins.
I think you should go be a marketing consultant for a number of the players in the space, because that sounds very much like how they're trying to sell this. They know that there's a significant pleasurable desired DX around those types of models, and they're saying we can repurpose those models and back them with much more sophisticated things like a CRDT that's syncing out to a cloud server or whatever.
Okay. Well, yeah, give me their contact information. I'll see what I can do. But yeah, I think GraphQL was always going to fail because it was solving the problem fundamentally in the wrong way. It's saying we're going to reduce your data load by making more round trips to the server all the time. If they had inverted that, we're going to reduce your data load by doing large batch fetches from the server and then updating ad hoc when data is stale and giving you the same API that GraphQL gives you, that I think could have been a winning strategy. And that's real. I think that's compelling, because I look at GraphQL, I look at the promise of it, I look at those autocomplete tools, and I think, man, I love it. I absolutely love it. I just, yeah. How do we? Maybe that could be the poisoned apple, or wrong term, but the hook, the addict thing.
Right. I think there's a tremendous amount of potential here, and I want to reemphasize that local first software development is, and especially local first web software development, is really just saying, let's take all the things that we currently assume can only happen on a server and ask how much of that could actually happen on the client device. It's not saying if you like this framework, you just have to give up because you've got no place. In fact, it's saying the opposite. Bring whatever application building techniques you have, but build more of those things into the client experience, the thicker client, to borrow a term from the 90s. Build thicker clients that have more of that stuff built in, and stop assuming that the only place for data is up in a cloud server. There's lots of other
Okay.
places. You asked earlier about like how do we, is WebRTC or WebSockets or whatever, like how are we going to have these
WebRTC.
client apps? Yeah, how are we going to have these client apps talking to each other? So we do definitely have WebRTC. The nice thing is that it's been around for a long time. There's a lot of abstractions. The bad news is that WebRTC never achieved its goal of zero server signaling. It's zero server after the signaling, but it still requires servers that can be quite expensive and quite single point of failure for the signaling aspects because of all the complexities of NAT traversal and stuff like that. There are
doesn't
other
Google
ways.
just give it to you for free though? I mean, don't you just get to
No.
use Google's Chrome?
So
If you're using Chrome, if it's in Chrome, you get that for free, right?
Not really. So there's two.
Okay.
Without getting too much into the rabbit hole, there's two standards. There's stun and turn. One is used for the signaling, but one is used for media relay, which is what most people are trying to do with WebRTC is do media relay, kind of like the call that we're having here. They're trying to do media relay, and media relay is absolutely not free because it's very expensive to the provider. So I believe it's turn servers are the media relay. I might have that backwards. It's stun and turn. But whichever one of those is the media relay servers, there are not free ones. There are companies that you can pay for, but it's hundreds of dollars a month to pay for a scaled out media relay server. Anyway, so WebRTC, if we thought about it as one standard, I think it's actually a really good API, but this signaling problem is kind of the fly in the ointment or the poisoned apple, to borrow the term from you from just a minute ago. But there
I'm
are
probably
options.
using that wrong.
There are options for fixing the signaling issue. One of those options is if you move from purely web into hybrid apps, if you use those native wrappers with web views, things like Tauri, things like Electron, things like Socket Supply, these hybrid, the old days, it was like PhoneGap and Ionic and stuff. There's dozens of them, but those native apps have the potential to kind of break outside of the current restraints of the web and give you true peer-to-peer communications through networking protocols. And so there are multiple options there for a web app to be given a slightly extra superpower, which is let you communicate. There's also potentially, I really hope this happens, there's a working group working on a standard for peer-to-peer local peer-to-peer communications, which would be able to tunnel between my two devices using things like Bluetooth or local Wi-Fi, which is a standard that Android and iOS put together. So there are web standards that maybe hopefully land someday that are going to let our web apps talk directly peer-to-peer, even without those native wrappers around them. But I do think that will, for people that decide to go that route, that's not local first, that's kind of beyond local first. But when you go beyond local first to trying to get closer to a peer-to-peer architecture of an app, that's where you see the true benefit of potentially shutting down your cloud server entirely and foreclosing on your entire cloud bill, because most of what you need to communicate with can actually tunnel over these peer-to-peer networks. And so I think that's a little bit further out from local first, but I think it's a step along the way. I think local first, and then that will come after that.
But then how do you get people, if you can't ransom the data, how do you get people to pay? How do you turn them from users to customers?
Yeah, I mused about this on my Twitter account a while back. Like, are there any business models that are compelling that are not based upon we hold you ransom? And we brought up 37 Signals. They are basically saying we're a successful business that is doing exactly that. You pay a one-time fee, you license our software, it's all your software and it's all your data, and you don't have to keep paying us a subscription ransom fee. You have to be willing to think about your business model potentially the way that we used to think about business models, which is not how do I capture as much possible value from every single user as humanly, you can imagine, versus how do I capture enough value that my business is viable and growing? You have to somewhat restrain the greed when you design business models that way.
I don't know that it's greed as much as it's hype and You need money. You need a lot of money. You need a lot of time. So if you want to get the money, you got to get the investment. If you get the investment, you have to offer almost everything for free because you need the drug. And if you offer everything almost for free, then you'll never make that money back in a one-time payment because the cost is too high. The investor won't get their return. So you have to make it a subscription. I mean, even when you look at the companies, the profitable companies, Microsoft, Apple, they're actually profitable and they're turning to subscription models because it's the only way to grow. There's no growth opportunity left once you capture the planet.
I don't agree that it's the only way to grow. I agree that it is currently the most popular and compelling way to grow. So
how do you grow once you've captured everyone on the planet?
What's that?
How do you grow once you've captured everyone on the planet other than subdividing your services and turning them into subscriptions? Because the only way you can't multiply, like there's 10 billion people, you've caught all 10 billion people. All 10 billion people have bought your product or use your service that can. Facebook, Apple, whatever. How do you convert them? It's either ads or it's subscriptions, because subscriptions you can give them, well, we told you this was the pro tier, but actually now there's the ultra tier. We told you it was the ultra tier, but 4K is actually moving to the ultra plus tier.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not going to answer. I'm not going to give a very satisfying answer here, but it's the best one I think we can fit into this particular podcast episode, which is that's part of why the Web3 folks are saying, hey, pay attention to us, because we have tried to come up with a decentralized mechanism for monetization. I'm not here to shill for Web3.
Yeah, I know.
There might very well be useful ideas where, I'm just going to give a crazy little example. Let's imagine that I've built a calendaring app, kind of like what, 37 Signals did. They built a calendaring app. I build a calendaring app and I sell it for $10 and I let you run all your own data. You can host it wherever you want on a $3 VM or whatever. And I don't charge any subscription fee. But then let's imagine that I come up with some really compelling, cool thing like an AI summary of a calendar or something. I'm just making something up. Well, I can deploy services out there on the peer-to-peer web that say you can choose on a per calendar event basis to opt into this, and it's going to cost the equivalent of $1 of cryptocurrency transaction for you to have that data that you send from your calendar sent into this black box, and then this smart contract sends you back your AI summarized data or whatever. I'm literally making something up on the fly, but I can monetize that way. I could create services out there that people can choose to use on an a la carte basis. And if I make those services compelling enough and I make it easy enough for people to pay for, I think you can grow without locking people into subscriptions. But I do concede that the vast majority of the world and basically every investor in the world is only interested right now in the subscription-based business models.
Yeah. And just to touch on the Web3 thing, I think it's really unfortunate because I do see the good ideas. The problem is, one, they called it Web3 as a gimmick because it's not the web. What they want is they want an alternate universe in which it's kind of like Rust, right? Like Rust, they want an alternate universe in which programming is perfect without trade-offs, other than the trade-off of learning Rust, right? But and the Web3 people, they want this perfect universe that literally can't exist because like first principles and incompleteness theorem and so they're, instead of saying, okay, we're gonna evolve the web, we're gonna take what we have and we're gonna make it one step towards our ideal. They're saying we're starting over from scratch, but not just from scratch, like really from scratch. Like we would get rid of TCP if we could, but somehow we haven't figured out how to do that yet. Like if the Web3 people had their way, you would have to buy a proprietary network card, and by proprietary I mean not in accordance with any existing standard and not useful to any other standard. It would be open, of course.
Can I briefly offer an alternate view of that world? Having spent a brief 6 months there, I'm certainly not a spokesman for Web3, and I'm not here to shill for some Web3 coin or something. But the underlying culture that I was exposed to in that world when I was trying to learn it and trying to figure out, they hired me because they wanted me to help bridge the gap from Web 2 to Web 3. And so I was trying to look at it from that perspective. What's missing? What are they assuming that's not true, and all of that. And one of the things that I got from the culture, the cyberpunk genre of writing seems to be an extremely important part of the culture in Web3. And if you read people like Neil Stephenson or whatever, I'm not a big reader, but I did read a couple of his books trying to get this mindset a little bit more injected into mine. And if you read that, I think they're actually saying something a bit opposite of what you're saying. I think what they're saying is not, we want an idealistic, perfect world, but they assume that the world is inevitably going to fall in on itself in its current track. And the only way to avoid the certain doom, I'm using really big words like I was a writer of,
There's something
Neil
there.
Stephenson.
There's
But
something
the
there.
only way to avoid that is to jump to their view. So from where we sit in a mostly functioning but certainly not zero problem world, we look at them and say, oh well, those folks are just, they're pie in the sky, and they want things that are never going to happen. It's completely naive and idealistic. But I think their perspective is, man, you just don't even realize that the track that you're on is already going to fail. It's inevitable. And we're just trying to get as many people to jump off that track before the train goes off the rails. That's
but my argument is that we need a bridge. We need an off ramp, because what they're asking is jump off the train 150 feet down into the gorge below, rather than jump off to the train onto this nice little floating Ninja Turtle blimp we have for you.
Right, but that's exactly why I left that space, and why I'm trying to build things that I think will constitute the gap, that will bridge the gap. And I call it the Web 2.5. This idea of owning your identity, this idea of promoting local first, this idea of, those are things that I think need to happen if anybody's ever going to plausibly make that jump. That's my belief.
Okay, so I think we're at time for this. For those listening on, I actually want to continue on with another segment, but I think we need to wrap this one up.
Can I make one last plug?
To do so. Please.
Okay. One last plug around this space. So I have been building pieces in the local first and the identity space. And anybody who's followed me on social media has seen me building libraries, like, for example, the local vault library. I'll provide all of these links, but the local vault library to use passkeys to own your identity. That's one set of effort that I'm trying to do to help create the things that other smarter people will actually build real viable solutions around. I'm trying to put together those Lego pieces so that they can be used. The other thing that I wanted to say, which is related but separate, which is a recent initiative that I have around what I call bring your own JavaScript. There has been a decidedly anti-framework tone to our conversation, and I just want to state clearly for the record, I am not anti-framework. I am not down with React and Vue sucks. The people who created those things are far smarter than I am, and I look up to them. I wish I was as good an engineer as many of the people that design these systems, and I'm glad they exist, and they are solving things in ways that many of our engineers in the industry really appreciate. I am not blowing smoke when I say I think there is a tremendous amount of value there. But what we have lost is what I lament. What we have lost is the appreciation of the importance of understanding how the systems work under, and how sometimes those aren't the right answer. We've lost that appreciation. And so BYOJS, bring your own JavaScript, is really designed to not say down with frameworks and down with TypeScript and down with tools, but rather let's carve out a separate space where we can champion those who still believe that those skills and techniques are important, and we can mutually sit alongside the much bigger behemoth of the framework first crowd. So I just wanted to plug the stuff I'm trying to do around local vault and using passkeys to create our identities and protect our data locally. And then this bring your own JavaScript is trying to champion JavaScript without the requirement to go very heavy on framework and tooling. Those are things that I think will be very important keys, I hope, in the local first movement. But I don't own the local first movement in any way, right? I'm one guy. I don't have a company in local first. There are many, many other people out there. So I hope that people won't take my little slice of thinking about local first as gospel. There's a tremendously big community, a couple thousand people in the Discord community for the local first web dev, which we'll have a link to. I invite anybody that's curious about local first, even if you totally disagree with how I've presented it, but you're still curious, please come and join that community, because there is a big tent. There's a lot of room for a lot of different ways of doing it. I just have my own little tiny slice of how I'm trying to go about it.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And again, we're gonna continue on with another segment. We're gonna wrap this one up. So let's go ahead. We're gonna do picks. If you it sounds like you're not gonna have any problem with that. I'm gonna go ahead and have Steve go first, because I want to be. We've already not been sensitive to your time, so go ahead and have you go first there, Steve.
All right. So my picks are the highlight of any JavaScript Jabber episode, at least the ones that I'm on, with the dad jokes of the week. So let's see. This is sort of a visual one, but I'll make it a little better. Fun fact: the sentence "Are you as bored as I am?" can be said backwards. Right? Am I as bored as you are? Is how it's backwards.
Nice.
Right. Second, I've been a bit bored lately myself, so I decided to take up fencing. Man, are my neighbors mad at me. And then finally,
Nice.
This is a rather tasty question. Why did the cannibal leave the restaurant? He got cold feet.
Oh, that's so bad. That's so bad.
At least bring it out warmed up. Ugh.
Right. Well, the similar question is why did Jeffrey Dahmer keep a blender on his porch? He'd like to greet people with a warm handshake.
Oh, that too soon. Too soon.
Sorry, Kyle
Too
inspired.
soon.
Kyle inspired that one to me.
Oh, I feel icky inside right now. Oh, that's gross. Please don't do that again, Steve.
Yikes.
Those are all the dad jokes of the week.
My waifu is here. She can say hello.
Tell her I said hi. It's been a while since I've seen her.
Steve says hi.
Hello.
Kyle says hi as well. I hear her shouting hi, Kyle, and hi, Steve. So I don't think the mic picks up. Anyway, all right, great. Was there anything else on that, Steve? Or are we ready to move on to Kyle?
Ready to move on.
All right. Oh wait, no, we do the guest last. That's how we do it. See, it's been so long, I'm rusty.
Well, you're moving on from me. But...
Yeah, I am moving on from you. That is what I'm doing. All right. So the thing that I want to pick is gonna be Utah JS conference. Utah JS conference. The videos have dropped. So if you want to watch the Utah JS stuff, the videos have dropped, and I'm gonna Utah JS Conf 2024. I thought it was a great conference because I think this is the second year in a row that I'm seeing the glaze coming off of people's eyes. Or no, that's not the right expression. People are starting to see the light. Like the scales are coming off people's eyes, and they're starting to see the light. Because there were so many great talks that were, hey, maybe we could do this in a simpler way. One of the ones that I absolutely loved was, I forget his first name, is something Delaney, I think. He gave a presentation on the thing that caught my eye about it was server-side events. And it turns out you can implement server-side events literally in a tweet. An actual functional server-side events will fit in a tweet. Well, okay, I put it in an image in a tweet. But anyway, yeah, and I'll give that too. And I would look up the name, but I don't want to take up too much time what the actual talk was called. But let's see, SSC in a tweet. Where'd my tweet go? Oh, I don't have it, but there's that. Okay. Oops, that URL went nasty, but oops. Okay, anyway. So yeah, those are two of the things that I'm gonna pick right now. I've got a couple other picks. Maybe I'll pick in the next segment. But that's Utah JS conference. Go take a look on YouTube. I just put the link in here. But if you look up Utah JS on YouTube, the conference, I really thought there were some great talks. There was one that was the 100-year web app, how to choose technology that will survive. That, you know, if somehow it's still hosted in 100 years, it would still work in 100 years. I thought that talk was excellent. So many excellent talks this year, because it was getting away from. I mean, there was still some framework hype there, but it was getting away from framework hype, and it was getting back to, not necessarily back to basics, like server-side events. I wouldn't necessarily say basics, but it was mind-blowing to find out how simple they are in comparison to WebSockets, how performant they are, and see that demo that was done. And there was 3 or 4 talks I went to where I was just blown away with. I learned stuff that I feel is valuable that I'm going to use. And I don't often feel that way about the hype stuff, but I mean, a lot of that's my attitude. But anyway, so I got that. Kyle, what are your picks?
I'll just do one. Similar to, but definitely not the same. And this is not something I created, but the last couple of days, a new initiative is launched called the Pure Web Foundation. And you can get to it at pureweb.dev if you're interested. But the Pure Web Foundation's goal is to, similar to BYOJS, is to champion building with the web platform without frameworks and tools necessarily layered on top. It's an attempt to kind of maybe even rediscover the way the web was built before we were taken over by those things. I'm very excited about that, and I hope more people will kind of give it a look and kick the tires on this. We're going a lot of resources that we're going to try to create for it. So it's not about creating code or libraries, but about creating resources that help educate around that. So,
all right. Well, thanks for that. And it has been a pleasure having you so far. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about this, and glad that we get to have some warm disagreements.
Indeed.
I think that always makes an episode a lot better, and I'm glad that you're able to defend your position, because I'm gonna say something that I don't normally say. Sometimes, if people don't defend their position, I just don't ask the next question. So
there you go. Okay.
Because I don't want to be abrasive, but like when people defend the position, then that gives me the ability to dig deeper.
Sure.
Thank you for that. And
yeah, I've enjoyed it. It's been a good, lively debate. So thanks for having me.
All right. And with that, those of you who are online, stay tuned. But for this being cut for podcast release, adios, everybody.
Adios.
All right. So, Steve, thanks for joining in. And
he headed out.
All right. Okay. So let me. I've never been on an episode that we've purposely split into 2 episodes like this. So, I guess we'll just start over. I'll do the intro and.
Okay.
And then we'll keep the live stream going. We got a good populace here. So, all right. Well, hello, and welcome back to another exciting episode of JavaScript Jabber. This is actually a continuation from the episode that you may have heard last week, or I don't know how this is going to get cut, but this is we're still here together right now. I've got Kyle Simpson on the line, and while we were doing our warm-up talk before the podcast, we got into something spicy, and so we're gonna cover that topic as well. So anyway, welcome back. I am AJ O'Neill. I am your host, and this yo coming at you live from the shed that stinks because of the flycatcher thing, my Bob. And Kyle, go ahead, and for the audience that is going to be listening to this, probably a week or two apart from the last episode we just cut. Who are you? What do you do? Why are you famous? And why do you
Well, I
have
don't
two
know.
Twitter handles?
I don't know why. I don't know whether famous is the right word anymore. I think maybe more infamous. But
Infamous.
in any case, I'm Kyle. A lot of people know me online as Getify. Been around now for most of the web. I've been doing this engineering thing for like 25 years or more, so long time. And I'm most well known for the You Don't Know JS books. And those were published in the last decade or so, 2 editions, 6 books each, or 6 books in the first edition, and then kind of like up in the air how many books for the second edition. But anyway, the You Don't Know JS books are how most people know me. That spun off a whole series of courses that I've done on front-end masters, corporate trainings, and conference talks. So that's how a lot of people out there will probably know me.
Yeah, I think that you're certainly one of the bigger names in the industry. So I think you're famous. You're famous and
Well, I
ahead.
appreciate it.
And I always love I've always loved when you give presentations, or I think we've had you on the podcast a couple of times.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think so.
I disagree with a lot of what you have to say, but I learn, and sometimes I come around to your way of thinking. So I think you have been a great educator, and hope you continue to do so. All right. So with that out of the way, so the spicy bit. I'm just gonna say this plainly. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, because I think that between you and I and the people watching, I think that's gonna be all right. I have noticed over probably the last 6 months, your tweets have gone from being things that were felt more positive, more energetic, to a lot of tweets coming through that have a really bitter tone to them. And I am curious as to what's going on. I was saying before, I think that some of it's resonating with an industry problem. It's not just like you're having a personal thing in your life and it's making you bitter, although I think that there might be something there. But there's some sort of industry problem that's going on that's reflected in this. So do you agree that, especially in the last 6 months, you have become a little bit bitter, and why?
I very much agree, except for the time frame. I would say it's longer than that. I would say it's at least 12 months, and if we really kind of zoomed out, we might say that the way that I've approached social media has really changed quite a bit over the last 2 to 4 years. But I'll say that in the most immediate sense, I am absolutely dealing with a significant amount of, I'll call it personal animus, frustration. Uh, One of the biggest reasons for that is that I have now been unemployed for a full year. And it's not for lack of trying. I've done a lot of applying and some interviewing and a whole lot of effort. Haven't been able to find a place. And, there's going to be a lot of different reasons why that's the case. I'm not going to try to come on here and shift the blame onto everybody else. I own a lot of that. With particular
Better man than
respect
I.
with particular respect to the tone, um, I've had some, I'll call it love-hate relationship with social media for quite a while, going back at least several years. And part of the reason for that is because of the success that I had in building a bit of a long tail following around my takes on JavaScript and trying to encourage people to learn it. And I am regularly seen as someone who kind of challenges the status quo and pushes back and asks more challenging questions. And I think that's resonated with quite a few folks. I hope that people have felt empowered to own why they feel a certain way. That's certainly always been my mission. But I didn't make a lot of friends along the way, is the point I'm trying to make. I've made a name for myself by being willing to be disagreeable in what I hope has still been productive ways. But I made a name for that by being a bit more divisive or churning, stirring the pot, whatever kind of metaphor you want to use. And that I did not recognize, and probably should have, but I did not recognize the cost of building my brand that way. And I didn't even think of it as building a brand at the time. But over the last 15 or whatever years of my public persona, I built a brand around this guy who comes up with these hot takes on JavaScript and is, challenging the status quo and is a little bit maybe cantankerous at times and gray beard and old school and any of those other terms. And I also, because of that large following, because I'm a human and I have an ego, I enjoyed the fact that I had, 80 whatever thousand followers, and that when I had something to say, people listened. They didn't always agree. In fact, probably mostly didn't agree, but at least they listened. I had a megaphone that I could speak through, as opposed to if I just had a little personal Twitter account somewhere with, 7 followers and half of them were my family. That's not much of a megaphone to make, a difference if I have a thought. So over the last several years, I increasingly started sharing thoughts at times that didn't have anything to do with my technological perspective, whether they were about politics or religion or other social issues. As a person, I was willing to kind of share my personal views on things. And I was doing so through this megaphone that had been built around the brand of JavaScript, questioner, I'll call it. I didn't realize that that was going to be taken so poorly. And I pushed back a lot on people who would try to they try to police what I'd say. And they'd say things like, stick to the JavaScript. We don't want to hear what you have to say about, politics or whatever. And I pushed back on that. And I still feel like it should have been my right to be whoever I wanted to be with my own online persona. But what I didn't appreciate at the time is how many people had come along for the ride only because of what they liked about what I had to say with JavaScript and technology. And so I sort of broke an unspoken contract in doing that by trying to become something more than the JavaScript guy and talk about other things. It really created some strong frustration in folks. And I didn't appreciate just how tangible that would be. So there were a couple of different instances over the last several years where I ended up creating a pretty significant storm of frustration and controversy over one of my, over something that wouldn't necessarily have been about JavaScript. One of them was on my views on healthcare and health insurance. And I have some very personal and real experiences with that are difficult. And another one was on probably the most recent, a year or two back, was on what I thought we should do to change how we onboard engineers into being new engineers on teams and into the industry. I had thoughts about that. And in both of those cases, I believe that I was significantly misunderstood in what I said. But I'm not here to defend myself because the damage has already been done. But there was a lot of people that got really mad at what I said. They took it in ways that were very much not what I intended and went with it. The most recent round involved a significant push to boycott my courses and books, to try to tell people that I should never be employed in the industry again, and literal personal threats of harm in direct messages that other people have experienced. I experienced it too. And because of those periods of time and other smaller periods in between where I get really frustrated, I'll kind of like take a break from social media, hoping that I can kind of clear my head. And then I come back in a week or a month or sometimes much longer. And I try to pick up where I left off and maybe have a better reflection on how I've been. But one thing in this most recent kind of kerfuffle was somebody said to me on it was a LinkedIn post. Somebody said to me, you're very logical and you're defending your points well and you're making your points well here, but what you're missing is that you're just not kind. And I took quite a bit of time to reflect upon that assertion, and I think that person is absolutely right. I don't think I'm a very kind person. And I actually dug into this with my therapist. I see a therapist and I like normalizing those things. I think it's helpful for people. I see a therapist and I went to my therapist and I talked with them about this. And what I can say is that because of some quirks of the way my personality works, kindness is not actually a priority of mine, which is why I'm not kind. There are things that I think are much more important. And one of those is the authenticity of being the same person in every situation and conversation. Every person I interact with, I want for them to come away thinking that's the same guy as he was over here, and he was over here, and he was in his book, and he was in this conference. I want to be that. That's one of my core psychological drivers. But it's really messy how this plays out in social media. So when you see my frustration around my lack of employment, see my frustration around decisions that I made along the way that I didn't realize were going to box me in later, when you see my frustration around how I'm so regularly mistaken, how there can be people that really believe in what I'm trying to do, and then there are other people out there, probably not listening to this episode, but there are other people out there who are really, really strong Getify haters. They're really strong detractors. And I get web notifications or people tell me about threads that just randomly spin up on somewhere on a Reddit, or there's dozens of them that I get screenshots of private Discord chats, and people just really like to talk a lot of crap about me. And I've upset a lot of people. I never, one thing I would like to say in my defense is to say that I do not insult people. I do not make my points by way of trying to attack the person and demean the person and condescend the person. I have some very strong opinions of what I feel, and I'm trying to avidly portray what I feel when I'm in these conversations and social media or whatever. I take up the case strongly and passionately. But most people that I engage with in these negative fashions don't have that same line. They very quickly turn to attacking me as a person, calling me a troll, telling me that I'm, a bad influence. I've been told many times, you should be unemployed. You don't deserve to have a job. Right.
Oh,
That's tough. Right. And I own that I've created a lot of controversy around myself. I'm a lightning rod. I own that. But I do think that you won't go back and you won't find examples of me saying things like hurtful things like that to other people, because that's not in my nature to attack people. I disagree a lot and I have some strong feelings about some people, but it's not in my nature to go after people's personal ethics and morals in that way, the way that I've fielded a lot of that. So I guess this was a very long-winded way of saying the increasingly negative tone you're hearing from me in a lot of social media, especially Twitter, but even it's crept into my LinkedIn and people have said it there too now. That negativity is coming because I'm not really in a great place, if I'm being honest. I'm pretty frustrated about where the industry is, where it's headed. I'm frustrated personally about how it left me. I don't have a place really, or I don't feel like I have a place. And how I felt like I really spent my career trying to keep us from getting here, and we still got here. And then you mix in all the other stuff. Like I'm just, it's difficult for me. I consider being logical and rational to be the most respectful thing that I could ever do with somebody I engage with. That's the way, that's part of how I'm wired. But I think most people experience that as meanness, as rudeness, as being too curt and too dismissive. And so I know that there's a lot of people, and maybe a few of them are listening. I know there's a lot of people out there that feel like I've ruffled feathers over the years on that. And I just want to say it was never ever my intention to personally demean or attack a person. I've always tried to stick to the topic.
Sure. I hear you there. I'm not a kind person. I don't aspire to be a kind person. I think that, and there's nuance to how to say this, but kindness is a form of manipulation, as opposed to, or sorry, not. I actually said that wrong. I distinguish between nice and kind. Nice is a form of manipulation. Kind is a form of authenticity. And the way that you were speaking, I was interpreting as people want you to be nice. But I think that it is, in fact, kind to confront. And I feel very comfortable when, like, this is a frustration I have. I will get into arguments with someone, a heated argument, and walk away thinking, I don't like them as a person, but I respect them for their knowledge. And when I have that problem, I want them on my team. And I wish that more people were that way. I have had frenemies become friends because we were arguing about something and we could call each other D-bags or whatever. We could do a little bit of name calling, but we could walk away having learned, like, okay, this person's actually really smart at this. And they've got some opinions I don't agree with, but yeah, I want them on my team if I'm doing X because I can tell they know X. And there's, I mean, it's not like hundreds of people, but there's a handful of people that over the course of my career that I have gone back to. And, the friendship, like first it was the fighting or the argument, like the two cats that just like something about you I don't like I don't even have a reason to, I just don't like it. And then that turning into but I respect you. And that turning into, okay, well, let's actually work together on this project where you're obviously better. And that turning into friendship. I wish that was the norm. I think that was the whole idea behind, if you can't beat them, join them. When somebody's bested you, when they've defeated your arguments, when they've made you look bad because you were wrong, to be able to go back and say, but dang, do I want to have you on my team for this project? So I don't know. Does that resonate with any of what you were saying or feeling?
Yeah, parts of it for sure. The cheesy way of saying it is to disagree without being disagreeable. And I think that last part, I've got a lot of work that I could still improve on, because I think that the intent that I have in what I'm saying versus the way that I'm experienced by others, there's a wide gap there. And I literally struggle with this all day, every day. Why is there such a wide gap? Why don't people experience me the way that I'm intending to come across? And so I believe that there's a lot of people that have been turned off to what otherwise could have been, useful disagreement and collaboration, because they've been really unhappy with the disagreeable way of me doing things, whether that's being too, me being too quick to respond to something. I experience on a regular basis feeling like the rest of the world is going in slow motion compared to me. I don't know if anybody else feels that way, but in any sort of conversations or debates, I feel very much like, because I spend so much time in my own head thinking about things, I already know exactly why I feel the way that I do. Right or wrong, I have lots of deep reasons behind it. And the rest of the world is just so slow motion compared to that, and can't understand. And I can't even get them to listen to me long enough for me to articulate why I feel that way. But I hear when, that old adage of like, strong opinions loosely held or whatever. I've never understood or been able to agree with that. Partly because if an opinion is loosely held, to me, that means that one statement to the contrary you might throw out the whole opinion, right? Just like one new fact, and you might completely flop. And I'm not going to share an opinion on something until I have a mountain of reasons for why I feel that way. Because I've already spent hours or days or weeks in my head about it. I don't even share opinions on things unless I've already spent that time. I do appreciate when somebody comes along with a mountain of counter evidence. I really enjoy that. And I have actually changed opinions. I know there's people out there that are like, no, he's never changed an opinion. I have, but it's rare.
I believe it.
It's rare. I rarely find people willing to defend their reasoning to the same level of rigor as I've got driving what I feel about something. And so that creates a real imbalance. And I think that is where a lot of the static comes, is this imbalance that I'm coming to the fight already prepared with a bunch of stuff. This person feels that way. And I'm not invalidating that they feel the way they do. That's fine. You're entitled to your own opinion. But if you're going to try to convince me, you've got to bring the same amount of counter evidence. That's how I've always taken it. So I've probably missed out on a lot of what you were saying about the opportunities that you've had to kind of in retrospect go back and rebuild a bridge and all of that. I've missed out on a lot of that.
Well, for me, that's been in person. That hasn't been over Twitter. That's been, somebody that I went to school with, somebody that I lived in the same apartment complexes. Those have been situations where I've actually had real interaction with the person and some proximity to them. I don't think I've ever. Okay, so I think enough time has passed and it's well established. I can talk about this. So we had Jake Archibald on, and I was not prepared. I did not know who he was. We've switched booking systems a few times on JavaScript Jabber. And we had done that recently within the last month or two, and it was still a problem where like the emails wouldn't get sent. And so it's like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing this week. Chuck was out sick or something. I mean, and so we were having this conversation, and I also didn't really understand British culture. It's much more high context compared to American culture. Meaning that like there's rules that you have to know that are beyond what the words that are said that come out of the mouth. And that relationship, I don't think I'll ever be able to salvage. And I still respect him hugely for the work that he does. Like I've used some of his stuff. I read his blog articles. I'll retweet him. We still every once in a while get into a little something. I'd even leave, like, because I'll go on a thread that's like 6 years old for some web standard and just post an admittedly inflammatory comment because I want to get the conversation started again. It's like, okay, like this has been 6 years now. And then there's other people, you can see like, 8 months ago or 15 months ago, somebody did the same thing. And I didn't even, he responded to something because apparently he's part of some web standards body or whatever that I commented on. And I even look at it. But like, so that's my one big experience with somebody online where like, I respect him. I respect that he has knowledge that I don't have. I wish that it were the other way around as well. I think that my sense is that what he came away with was that, that I have no idea what I'm talking about whatsoever, and that my opinions were completely invalid. That's the way it came around to me. Cause I was like, I was being aggressive and questioning and pushing back on what he was saying. Cause there's a lot of stuff people say and it's like, it's dogma. They say it because they say it. It's not because that they know the truth behind it, or they're looking at it from one particular perspective. But a lot of the stuff with the web standards committees in particular, I get so frustrated because these people aren't web developers, a lot of them. They spend their time in system programming languages and they're making decisions on JavaScript, which, huge props to being smarter than the average JavaScript dev. But you need to walk in our shoes for a little bit before you ratify that standard, because like we have to live with those decisions,
Yeah.
So
I've had my ups and downs with Jake. I would say I'm in a similar place where I respect a lot of what he's built. I mean, I talked on the previous episode about I use one of the libraries that he built. I respect him and I appreciate the things that he's done. He and I don't likely have a salvageable personal relationship for a variety of reasons. But he's not the only one, so I don't want to spend my time focusing on him. The experience that you just described with standards has largely tracked with my experience. Going back to the early 2000s when I was first starting to get my head around JavaScript and trying to carve out a space where that was not an accepted thing. There were not jobs for JavaScript experts at the time. And I was trying to do so, and I naturally gravitated to trying to participate in TC39 discussion emails, email threads.
Whoa.
And I was shot down so harshly so many times that part of the reason I actually ended up writing the You Don't Know JS books, and part of the reason for that title, it's a big complex layering of meaning behind that book and that title. But part of it is because I was told so many times in both literal terms and, implicitly, figuratively, you don't know enough JavaScript to be here. You don't know enough of our terms. You don't know enough of you're not up to the bar that we need. And I desperately wanted to be good enough to ask questions, to propose ideas. And to this day, I desperately wish that I was good enough to be taken seriously by anyone in TC39 for that matter.
I think that's a lost cause, honestly. Looking through the messages I've looked through, you can't. It's political. It's 100% political. It's not technical. It's not reason. It's not logic. Sorry, I'm going to cut you off here because this is one that just inflames me. regex.escape. You read the message thread, and it's couched. It's couched so softly, like, due to the great respect that we have for so-and-so, and owing to his experience, we have carefully considered and decided to pursue other avenues for the time being with, and it's like, no, cut the BS. Tell the dude, look, I don't care that you're 100 years old. I don't care that you're one of the best C++ developers that's ever lived. You're wrong. You're wrong. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows we need regex.escape. There's somebody that people want to please standing in the way, and nobody has the courage. Everybody needs to be respectful. Nobody has the courage to say, look, this is a technical decision. Your emotions are getting in the way. It's 5 against 6 or 5 against 1, and we're putting this through. But the other thing with that is I've been on another standards body, very short-lived. I only went to 2 sessions. I couldn't stomach it. It was an IoT standards body, and the guy who was leading the thing, he took me aside and he's like, look, because you're new here, I'm going to school you on some things. This is so-and-so. He works for Cisco. His objective is that Cisco wants a patent on this. They're not going to do anything unless their patent is represented in this standard. This is so-and-so. It may not have been Cisco, so don't take, I'm just throwing some names out there. This is so-and-so. He's from, the Google team, and his objective is that he doesn't want Cisco to have any advancement whatsoever. He's going to try to block the patent being used whatsoever. And here's so and so, and he kind of gave me the lay of land. We had this this backroom conversation where he gave me the lay of the land and basically explained why no progress was going to be made, and that if any decisions were made, they weren't going to be the ones that benefited the people that the standard went to. Now, he didn't say it like that because he was optimistic, because he had done this for years. He was good at politicking. He knew that the incremental gains, just getting one good part of a standard through, was worth the politicking. I can't stomach it. So sorry for cutting you off there, but I can't give these TC39 people any excuse because I don't have that in my heart. I don't understand the politicking. It's not something I'm good at. And when there's something that is so obviously the right thing to do, and somebody says, well, the regex escape function won't escape strings that haven't been escaped, so we can't have a regex escape function. Instead, we're going to continue to have people download it from NPM or copy it from Stack Overflow. I can't do it. I don't have it in me. I'm not that good of a person.
I could fill up many hours of the podcast talking about dozens and dozens of battles that I've gotten embroiled in on topics like that. I wasn't involved in regex escape, but there's dozens of others, from global this to records and tuple syntax to 100 others. I will say, for anybody that's listening, I do believe there's quite a few people on TC39. It's not one body with one view, it's hundreds of people. And I do believe there's quite a few people on TC39 that really do have the best interests of JavaScript and really don't like and don't want to devolve into all the politicking and PR battle. I think there's quite a few people there. Unfortunately, the body doesn't work according to that tone from my experience, because there are others who have been there a long time and who have a lot of influence in other ways. But we should be very careful, I think, not to paint TC39 as a whole, because there's hundreds of different people and they are on a spectrum of what they are bringing to the table and what their biases are and their backgrounds and all of that. I just personally wish that I had ever been seen as a peer among that group. Not that I was like literally like had a seat on TC39, but I just wish that I had ever earned the right to be respected among that group. And the vast majority of my interactions have always treated me like I'm an outsider that's bringing an unwelcome amount of noise to what they would prefer to just be their own process. And I'm, I wish, but TC39 is not the only standards body that I've had that kind of experience with. It just, I've had more of that experience because I've cared about JavaScript for so long.
And I apologize if it sounds like I'm misrepresenting, but like when I come into these issues, it's the same people. It's like the same user handles across the various issues that I'm seeing that are holding back progress. And so from my perspective, and then hearing when Douglas Crockford used to talk about it, so just like my perspective is just, I'm not seeing the heroes. I'm seeing, pardon my French. No, I'm not even going to say it. You know what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
But
well, you may be not seeing them, but I just want to say I believe that they're there. But they aren't the ones that are so vocal on the GitHub discussion threads. They aren't the ones who triage issues. They aren't the ones who try to who create ostensibly welcoming experiences from those not on the body. And I wish that were the case. I wish there was a tone that wanted that, but I think for many reasons, I don't really think they want that. As a body, I don't think they really want it. They operate on GitHub as if they want it, but I think they would really prefer to kind of do their thing themselves. So I've largely tried to step out of any discussion around TC39 and around JavaScript, and I've stopped making my complaints about the language. And I mean, I even went so far as I
need to evolve to your point.
Instead of trying to change JavaScript, and instead of just complaining about JavaScript, I actually designed a whole programming language that has some of my ideas about what I wish a programming language were. Whether people like it or not, I wanted to do something productive instead of simply saying I don't like what JavaScript's doing. So I hope that maybe somebody's listening, maybe they can find others that they can be more welcoming to. But my experience over 15 or 20 years has not been very welcoming, unfortunately.
Yeah, so I don't know how you feel about these things, and we can have different opinions, but this is one of the reasons I hate COCs, because I learned very early on that a COC is not for inclusivity, it is for exclusivity. COCs are to be able to use broad brushes to target wrong thinkers and silence them. They are not to help people have a better experience. And, Simple Programmer, I think he went through a similar experience as to some of what you were talking about earlier, but it seems like he came out on top. Like he had some books dropped from his publisher, and Chuck had something similar happen. Which, I mean, the Chuck situation. Chuck was an innocent bystander. He literally was just saying, "Hey, I'll host the podcast and let you two talk about it," and that got him like lost bunches of sponsors, bunches of people that were going to come on the show, and I mean, he did nothing in my view. And I tried to see, because I'll be fair, if I think he did something wrong, I'll say it. But he had like the most generous take in the world of, hey, I don't know what's going on. I would love to have both of you on a podcast to talk about it. And that got him banned from conferences, dropped advertisers. It was insane. That was the first time that was before cancel culture was even the buzzword that it is today. It was still something where it's like, no, that's not real. Or, but yeah, it seems like, and when that happened, I'm not sure why Amy didn't come back on the show. I know that some of it is because she's busy, but I have to wonder if some of it was not due to online harassment, because there was some that went on that was uncomfortable. And yeah.
So I'll say, just since you brought up codes of conduct, I personally do feel like there is merit to codes of conduct, but the implementation of them and the enforcement of them is pretty flawed in my experience. And that I find frustrating. I think on the whole, our industry is probably better with them than without them, but doesn't foreclose that I think there's some pretty strong flaws with them. I personally experienced the negative side of that code of conduct enforcement at a conference that I was supposed to be a speaker at. And I had a talk that that I had given at other conferences successfully, and I was scheduled to give that talk at that conference. One of the marketers for that conference wrote an ad that made an inappropriate joke about the title of my talk, that made an inappropriate pun from the title of my talk. That was an outside marketer or advertiser or something. Nobody cleared it with me. I didn't know what was happening, but it happened. That ad offended a bunch of people, and those people turned their attention to me and my talk title, and they made a claim that my talk title was a violation of the code of conduct because of what that marketer advertiser did. The conference organizer and I had some long, drawn-out conversations about it. He was begging me to change the talk title, and on principle, I really felt like I wasn't going to change it, because I felt like that was not at all the intent of the talk title, and I didn't feel like it was fair to compromise on that. In the end, that conference organizer basically dropped me as a speaker. He said, well, if you won't change the title, then we can't have you speak, because one of our sponsor companies, a big sponsor company, is going to back out if you speak. So they dropped me from the program. And one of the things that frustrates me about that scenario, it's not like, oh man, I got deplatformed. I mean, it was one conference. I've given hundreds of conference talks. But what frustrated me about that situation was
Literally hundreds?
I've literally given like over 200 conference talks. Yeah.
Whoa! I did not realize.
I've been speaking forever. I've had plenty of opportunities on the stage, is my point. I'm not trying to brag or something, but I've had plenty of opportunities. It's not like
I get it.
Somehow like canceled or deplatformed. But the code of conduct is supposed to protect everybody equally. But in its implementation, it ends up unequally protecting some folks at the disadvantage of other folks. That's unfortunate. I should have been just as protected from an unfair claim against me as the people who had every legitimate right to feel their complaint about my talk title and feeling offended by my talk title. We both should have been equally protected. But in that case, basically the sponsor dollars won. That organizer said, I got to take the sponsor dollars and I got to kick you out. That sucks. And so I've seen codes of conduct go well, and I've seen them go poorly. And I think that's a case where they went poorly and was unfortunate.
I don't think I've ever seen them go well. I much prefer if you act like a douche, then you just lose respect and people don't take you as seriously. Maybe you won't get invited back. I think that just natural consequences, because the whole idea of the COC is, okay, we're gonna point out, draw attention to, and have a formal process to not call you a douche. Like, just let somebody call them a douche, you know? Just let the name calling be done and let people get over it. And if, you know, I guess it's like, if you don't know how to act like an adult and you don't know your audience, you're going to find out that the idea that there's a formal process to pick apart something you've said or done to hold a kangaroo court, that's all I see it as. I think I heard of one instance where somebody made an inappropriate joke and they COC'd him, and it was like a warning. But most of what I hear, but that you would do anyway. Like, you don't need a COC to say, hey man, that joke was a little inappropriate, especially for this audience and the professionalism that we're trying to have. We will not invite you back if you know, right. Like, have that, sure. But to COC somebody and then make an announcement. Okay, there was an inappropriate joke in track 3 at 12 p.m. by someone. And we have as part of our COC that those kinds of inappropriate jokes are not okay. So we just want everybody to feel safe. The person has been dealt with.
So I'll just say, you know, you and I do see this a bit differently. But I'm not saying I have the right perspective on this, but I think, code of conducts do serve a valuable purpose in that they call to our attention what I wish was already important to people, which is we need to have more empathy in how we deal with other people. That is missing. And I think it's trying to litigate empathy instead of inspire empathy. And that's where I think a lot of it goes wrong. Is we really wish that people were just, you know, better at understanding how their intentional or unintentional actions were, you know, making somebody feel unwelcome or unsafe. We really wish people just had that perspective, and that we could just kind of like have a quick little conversation with them and they would totally get it and say, you're right, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done it. But a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't feel that way. And so we've got to litigate this empathy into the situation. I think that's where a lot of the
I think you just pull them aside and say,
happen.
hey, we're not gonna, you know, do you see what was done there? We're not gonna invite you back if you know, or say, like, we'd like you to apologize. You know, put the responsibility back on the person if that's what needs to be done. If they can't take the responsibility, but to make a spectacle of it, you know, it's just.
Yeah.
I think
there's
you and
a performative aspect for sure, but I think part of the reason for the performative aspect is because this is still not the norm for people to take the personal accountability, and so they kind of have to overcompensate. I'm not saying the overcompensation is good, but there is an overcompensation because we're making up for the fact that this is not yet the norm, and I don't know how long it'll be until it is the norm. But everybody really should be acting, I think, with that empathy, that at the instant that somebody points out, hey, that thing that you just said or did was like, it was over the line, or it bothered me, or it made me feel uncomfortable, that the instant reaction should have been like, that wasn't my intent, I'm sorry, I'll fix that joke, I won't do that in the future, that wasn't my intent, and I'm really sorry. Like, we could resolve so many problems if people really genuinely cared to be empathetic like that. And there will be people who have malicious intent, who are going to say things and they're not going to feel contrite. Those people definitely do need the litigious part of a code of conduct, but it's sort of this one size fits all paintbrush that all interactions need that same performative aspect, and they don't. it's really hard to know in advance whether a person is going to be like really receptive and understanding, or whether they're going to make a big stink about, no, I have the right to say whatever kind of joke I want to say. So I think it's really hard for me to imagine us being more successful without them. But I don't think that we've figured out the right way to position these yet.
Well, I don't want to drag on with this, but I just want to bring up one more thing. So I did a bad thing once. I gave a talk at a PHP track, and my talk was getting started with PHP. And as you might imagine, my first slide was the word don't. And
Okay.
and I would say like, and I made fun of PHP the whole time. I did try to give like useful information. I said something like, don't use PHP because it's overly complicated. The way that it handles objects are terrible. And this was PHP 5 or so. But if you do, here's how to overcome that pitfall. Never run a PHP server standalone. But if you do, here's how to overcome that pitfall with a reverse proxy instead. Never use WordPress because your server's going to get hacked. But if you do, here's how to install the security plugins. Or, so it was very much I don't like PHP and I hope that you don't use it. But if you choose to use PHP anyway, here are some things that I've encountered that mitigate the problems. But it was in bad faith, in the sense that I was trolling for my own personal ego, and the conference organizer pulled me aside and, just gave me a disappointed look. And he said, "That's not cool, man. I'm going to need you to apologize. You know what you did was wrong. That shouldn't have gone that way. And I'm embarrassed that you did that to our community." And so, I made a public apology, and I came back the next year and I spoke, and I didn't do something stupid like that. But, and I think that's the right way to handle it, is to pull people aside to deal with it man to man, or woman to woman, or what, man to woman, whatever it is. But, in the idiom, man to man, and to, to take that personal responsibility in both respects. And if I had said no, he probably would have said, "You are welcome to leave," and that would have been the right thing to do. And so I agree that we should have standards, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I just, I'll leave it at that. I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think that we actually have a lot in common. I think we have more in common on this point than we disagree on. But there's definitely some details we disagree on.
Since you brought up your story, I will flavor the conversation with my story that has some similarities, some strong similarities. A little over a year ago, I was asked to keynote a React conference. I don't know why I was asked to keynote a React conference, but I was. And I struggled with, what am I going to say to a React crowd? And I eventually decided that what I wanted to do, which I knew would ruffle feathers, but what I wanted to do in an attempt to be productive, is to give a talk that points out all of the frustrations that I have as somebody trying to come into React from the outside and learn and do something. And specifically, the frustrations I have because I can't do what I need with only React. Why is React so deficient in the following ways that the only solutions are all these external libraries and frameworks? Shouldn't this be something that is prioritized by React? So the talk was effectively from that frame of reference. Here's what I was trying to do. Here's my bad code, but here's why I think it's frustrating, because on the box React should offer me a solution and it doesn't, or whatever. So anyway, that was my talk, and it was not well received by the majority of the audience, I guess we should say. There were some people that really appreciated it, and they were like, it's really good to point out that there are some flaws that we're kind of missing because we're so engrossed in what React is, but the outsiders don't understand it, whatever. But I think the majority of people were like, man, screw that guy. And I didn't get invited back. I doubt I'll get invited back. I doubt I'll ever be invited to speak at a React conference again. So I've got I've got a similar experience. I get it.
It sounds like, I mean, I don't know what it was like. I actually want to look up the talk now. What was did they post it online or did you get cut?
No, it was posted online. The talk was actually framed around the topic of declarative coding versus it's called Weathering the Storm. Declarative versus imperative, weathering the storm. So you should be able to find the video for that. But.
All right, I'll watch that today or listen to it. Okay. Yeah, I'll be interested to see what my take is. And I'll let you know. But you know, if I feel like you came across as a bit too trolly, or if you came across as sincere, because I know in my presentation I did have good intentions. I mean, there were I was trolling, I was egoing, but I also did honestly, you know, it's like this was really frustrating to me, and this is how you can solve it. But every slide was, don't use PHP, but if you do, which obviously that was the wrong format. If I had inverted that to saying, you know, there's a lot of things I like about X, Y, and Z. And I think that if you use these, there's a lot of pitfalls you avoid. And so I'd actually encourage you to investigate those as you're on your journey. But talking about PHP, I could have done it in a way that was much more productive. Mm-hmm. So I'll take a listen to that talk, and I'll message you and give you my take if you would be interested in that. I don't want to put myself up on a a high horse or anything. All right. Okay. So this has been interesting. It definitely started off and has continued in a direction that I didn't expect. And I want to circle back around. Actually, is there anything else that's on your mind right now that you want to dig into?
I started off by saying that part of my frustration is my personal journey has included a year of unemployment, which has been tremendously difficult financially and otherwise for my family and all of that. Offshoot from that, not to say again that I don't own any of the responsibility for why some employers might not want to hire me, but I do think there are some macro level things that I believe to be true about our industry now that have changed and changed rather rapidly. And I want to call them out because I think they're a bad direction that we've gone. And I don't know if there's any dialing it back, but I just want to call this out. So when I joined as an engineer, when I started as an engineer back in the mid to late 90s, that's kind of when I got my feet wet with software engineering. And when I was joining, the industry was full of a number of extremely highly regarded founding fathers and mothers of the industry. There were people that had been already in the industry for 30 or 40 years at that point. And they were still active and involved in various parts of technology and internet and web and all of that. And they were in these highly regarded positions at the big companies, whether they're the Googles or whatever. Like they held these like distinguished positions in these companies. And I joined as this brand new engineer, and of course, I immediately I so looked up to them, right? Like I want to be like them. I want to do something important and impactful for the world, and I want to be like them. And that's not going to happen overnight. So I literally have intentionally spent a lot of my effort. It's something that I've regularly gone back to in my career over the last 25 years to try to pay my dues and to try to pay it forward and to try to give back more to this industry than I've taken, because I wanted to follow in those footsteps and I wanted to be that type of engineer for this industry. What I think has happened over the last, and I don't think it's been long, I think it's been maybe 2 or 3 years at most. It's not been long, but I think what's happened is the industry has basically decided that having people like that as part of the conversation is not important anymore. And in fact, not only is it not really all that important, it's actually more of a liability. I think what we've decided, the way I would describe this is I think what used to be the variance of the engineering ladder going from You just started to, you've got 10 or 12 or more years, right? Above 12, 15 years, etc. Like that was the variance of the engineering ladder. And there were companies that would always believe it was important to hire people near the top of that ladder. Now I think we've shrunk that ladder so much, where from the beginning of your engineering career to when you're like a seasoned staff or principal engineer, where that used to be 12, 15, 20 years, it's now like 4 to 6 years. I literally
Yeah,
saw a
this has
job
blown my mind.
posting. I saw a job posting just the other day for a staff level engineer, and they said 5 years JavaScript experience for a staff level position. And that was unheard of. That would have been unheard of back in the day. But that's the new reality. I'm not saying it's not a reality, which just need to embrace that it is the reality. And so because things are changing so quickly, and because companies are not really valuing those longer lived and more experienced voices in the conversation, I think we've seen a lot of these factors kind of reducing both the pay that is available in the industry, and really it's become where we don't hire people anymore, we hire roles. We don't hire people and tailor what we have them do based upon what their experience and their skill level is. We just hire into roles, and if you fit in the role, great, and if you don't fit in the role, we just don't hire you, right? That's a big change, where we now have more supply than demand. And I've looked at a whole bunch of jobs that, and applied to many of them, that are well below my level of experience at 25 years, and pay well below what I was making before. And I've tried to apply to those jobs, and I don't even get callbacks. I don't even get like interview. And part of the reason for that.
Are you submitting with Microsoft Word? Serious question.
No, I'm not submitting with Microsoft.
That is a problem, because the AI-based parsers will only elevate Microsoft Word documents.
Well, that's
There's
a whole other conversation. But let me just finish my point before I get too far afield. But those companies look, I think, whether they're doing it through automatic filtering or whether it's a person, I think they look at someone like me and they say, man, we're never going to have the budget to pay him what he's probably previously paid. And we're never going to have the job role to take advantage of his 25 years experience. So we're not going to hire him into this lower role because he won't be happy and we won't be happy. And so it's not simply that, in my opinion, it's not simply that, that there's a quote unquote more qualified candidate. At this point, what I'm seeing, and I'm not the only one, what I'm seeing is that the more senior you are, the harder it is to find any jobs out there, because they're kind of just being sunsetted. They're not firing super top level, 20-year experienced people, but they're not hiring them anymore. They're just not, and they don't want to. And I feel this is really troublesome.
It creates friction. It creates friction because you've got a bunch of young kids that have, that are senior engineers after 3 years of experience.
Right.
And you go into a room where you're challenging the prevailing wisdom. You're not seen as, oh, this person has the wisdom of the ancients. You're seen as, this person doesn't know what he's talking about. What a hack.
Right.
I mean, I could be wrong. Beard. I don't know if that's your experience.
I'm saying that's exactly what I'm seeing. I had
this is the Jonathan Blow thing. This is the collapse of civilization talk by Jonathan Blow. The people who are in the currently held positions are so far removed from the original knowledge that in many cases they are no longer able to connect it to the current knowledge.
Right.
Like
recognize appreciate it. Yeah.
It's like it's kind of like the inverse of the sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Like you sound like a soothsayer when you come in and say, a few years ago it would have been if you came up and said, hey, we should use a SQL database. Like a few years ago, that would have been like, what are you, out of the loop? It's like, no, not only am I out of the loop, I'm ahead of it again.
All right. So I think what I see happening, there's a lot of people that are claiming that the advent of AI is going to get rid of the junior engineer positions. And I actually think the reverse has happened. I think the advent of AI has been significantly improved the position of those entering, because they are not coming into this with any prior experience about or conceptions about what engineering should be. And they're excited to use whatever tools they can. And they're excited that
Yes.
they get a lot
Yes.
of visible bang for the buck, if you will, quickly. Those people are way easier for companies to imagine employing right now than people who have been doing engineering the quote unquote old school way for so long, and are more willing to call out the flaws, right? I'm just not as employable because I'm not on the bandwagon of we need all of our code to be generated by AI. And the entrants into this industry are by far more interested in that, or more willing to approach that as the way to do engineering. I was told in a
I love
recent
AI.
job.
I love
I
it,
don't.
but I don't know how anybody who's a junior could be effective with it. Because your BS meter has to go off. The BS meter has to go off. If the BS meter has, I mean, how are you going to get it?
Because they don't need it to be quality for it to ship. That's the difference.
Yeah, but it's got to work. Like, it's got to accept the form input, and it's got to post it, like it has to, at the bare minimum level, the code has to work. Now, I will say,
you and I disagree with is where that bar is anymore. I don't think that the bare minimum bar is the same place today as it was 5 years ago.
You're right, because there are plenty of websites
barely working.
Button, it doesn't work.
That's enough. But anyway, yeah. I think that they actually have an advantage. People entering the industry right now have this advantage because we did not have tools like that when I joined the industry, or all along, that would have so rapidly accelerated our ability to get something out, regardless of its quality, regardless of how fit it is for the task. They are just much faster at achieving any result than a more traditional engineering approach would. And I had,
interesting,
there was a very recent experience where I had gone through a very prolonged job interviewing process, really thought I was going to get it. I was down at the end final interviews, and then got told, oh, we've decided not to move forward. And the feedback they gave me was literally, we think you're too rigorous of an engineer. You're too concerned with solving the problem in the most complete way, and you're not interested in just shipping something quickly, and that you won't fit here because of that.
I see that.
That's just a reality. That's the way our industry's changed. And I'm not going to say that there's no benefit to it, because there are reasons why our industry's changed that way. But I don't think we've really come to terms with the cost of that quite yet. I think it's going to have a lot of costs down the road.
That's like a quadruple entendre right now, because I don't know how tapped in you are with the political space and how that has an impact on us. But interest rates are a large part of what is driving the need to make changes, not necessarily the motivation. Because people, like in normal human interaction, you feel upset, someone says what's wrong, you say the first thing that comes to mind. You don't, well, maybe you personally, Kyle Simpson, you may do this from the way you're speaking, but the average person doesn't recognize what's wrong. They don't know why they're angry or why they're upset. They're upset. They know they're upset. You ask them, oh, you seem like something's bugging you. What's bothering you? And they're just going to spit off the first thing that comes to mind, which is typically the most recent thing that happened. Like, they were upset. They were having a bad day. They stubbed their toe. So you say, why are you upset? Oh, I stubbed my toe. But no, that's not the reason you were upset. That's just the most recent thing that happened that put an impression negatively on your emotions. And I think that that's kind of what's happening in the industry in regards to this AI thing. Interest rates are the problem. Money is drying up. AI is an excuse which, paradoxically then causes more of the economic issue, because then people believe that AI is the solution. Like, people are not firing their employees because AI is picking up the slack. I somebody come at me with the data that shows that that's what's happening, but I think that everyone who's done marketing for an AI company has had their article refuted on that basis. People are losing employees and tightening the belt because the interest rates have gone up. When the interest rates go up, that means that for the investors to take out the money in the first place, they actually have to have a plan to pay back the money. Because when the interest rates are low, then you don't really have to pay back the money every month. You can just float on it. Like, imagine that, if you could get a 1% interest rate on, like, you had a big project you wanted to do and you were not being really conservative with your money. If interest rates were 1%, you could take out $50,000 and then you could sit on that $50,000 for the next 10 years and use the money to pay back the loan, and only use 10,000 of it to do whatever you wanted to do. So if interest rates are sufficiently low and you're financially savvy, you're going to take out way more money than you need, and you're going to use the extra money as a buffer. And I say financially savvy, not necessarily from a moral perspective. I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but I'm saying it's a trick you can use. You take out more money than you need. You use the money as a buffer to pay off the interest rates. That's what and a lot of people I think are truly evil. They get people to do this with their home equity loans to, take some blockchain course or some real estate course. Or I've got a friend, like, my heart just hurts for him because he's gotten suckered in, and I'm telling him, I'm like, dude, you are getting suckered. Like, please stop. This is going to be so bad for your family. This is going to be so bad for you. Just please just hear me out. Like, you are the sucker. Like, but nobody wants to hear that, Anyway, sorry, that's a tangent. But related to all this.
I don't actually think it's super tangential. I think the zero interest rates of the last 20 years are a big, big contributing macroeconomic factor. And they allowed a kind of arbitrage, like you're describing, that really enabled probably 50% or more of this industry to exist. Many of the companies that currently exist today should have failed, but didn't fail, because they had a business model that was propped up only by that macroeconomic condition. And I don't think that's coming back in my lifetime. I don't think it's coming back. So.
And the double negative on this is that what that meant was, and this is actually illegal. It is illegal to, I guess it depends on the state and at the federal level, but in general, it is illegal. It's considered an illegal, unfair business practice to put your products and services at a loss in order to extinguish competition. But that's effectively what these zero interest rates did, because the profitable businesses went out of business because they had to pay their costs that month.
Mm-hmm.
The businesses that had the zero interest rate loans funneled through investors, they did not have to pay their costs that month.
Yeah.
And so the businesses that were profitable went out of business, and the businesses that were unprofitable had an unfair advantage. And this goes into a whole ball of wax, but that's the Fed. It funnels into tech. Why do these tech companies from the last 20 years, why do they all parrot the same message? Why is there not a single publicly traded company that has a different opinion? Why is it only privately owned companies like 37 Signals that have a different opinion? When the money flows that way, it is the ideology, the philosophy, the ethics, everything about it, where the money comes from, is tainted. When you've got a profitable business, your relationship is to your customer. When you have a growth opportunity, your relationship is literally to the US government.
Yeah.
You are getting your money from the Fed. That is where, that's where it all goes back to. Now, you may have a different opinion on that or whatever, and I don't want to push that any further, but that's
no. I think the point is well made. I don't have much more to say about the employment industry, but I just hope that people are thinking more about, like, both the literal and the figurative costs here. And I'm personally just going to have to keep trying to find a way to invent a job, because I don't think I'm going to find the job, is kind of the reality that I've come up against. I need to wrap probably here. But I do think that this is a conversation that I hope maybe you'll have with even other people on this podcast. Bring people on and ask them their perspectives on these things, because it might be different than mine.
Yeah, I mean, I think because I've had, even some real world interactions with you over the years, it's a lot easier for me to have some real talk with you.
Yeah,
A lot of the people that we have
I
on the
get it.
show, that real talk is not, and yeah, and it's hard to navigate, because some people are high text communicators and some people are low context communicators. You and we're low context communicators, and that makes it a good pairing. It is
Yeah,
a
right.
very bad pairing when I get on with a high context communicator, because I'm not intuitive, and I take things at face value. I don't read signals, you know. so this anyway. Yeah, I don't want to monopolize your. Actually, I
Yeah,
absolutely
no,
do want to monopolize your time. I absolutely do, but
I've
I understand you
appreciated
got
the
to go.
conversations today. Today was really engaging. I hope it puts some thoughts in people that they'll chew on as they listen to this episode.
All right. Well, thanks very much for coming on and sharing about that. Like I said, it took a different direction than I was thinking. Some of the directions loop back around to some of the things I thought we were going to talk about. I thought we were going to be talking more about industry issues, but, kind of seeing how it all comes together, like the personal development and culture and ethos and the way of interacting and seeing with the world, plus the change and shift in culture and all that kind of culminating. Yeah, so thanks for coming on. I guess we'll go ahead and move on to picks then. And I'll go first. So I know so many people right now. This is what's blowing my mind. It makes me really worried because I myself am at risk. I work independently. I work for a few different companies, but it would be as the economic situation changes, I'm at risk, and I could be in a unfavorable position myself. And I know so many people that are highly qualified people that if I were hiring, I would hire them. And I wanted to share one other story. I know this guy, met him at a meetup.
I'm
He
sorry.
is
I hate to cut you off. I'm going to have to go. I apologize. We got down
Oh,
to the end
sorry.
of my available time. I'm sorry.
Okay, all right. Well, then
I want you to continue your story because it's probably very useful. I just wanted to let everybody know that that's why I have to sign off. I've got to go, but thank you very much. I appreciate it.
okay.
Thanks a lot.
Adios.
Take care. All right. Bye-bye.
All right. You go ahead and I will remove you here, and then I'll just finish that up. Okay. So what I was saying is I met this guy in a meetup. He is, there's probably like the 10 smartest people I've ever met. And this guy, this is so weird now because now there's nobody except the internet that I'm talking to. It's a totally different vibe. But there's, he's probably one of the 10 smartest people I've ever met, just in terms of like the way that he can reason about things. I mean, not just his knowledge, but like his ability to intuit patterns and connect the dots, right? And he works at an Amazon warehouse, and he also works on a compiler, and he is struggling to get a job for some of the same reasons that Kyle was mentioning, where he's overqualified and yet has no industry experience. Like the things that he can solve, the things that he can work on, he's overqualified for the positions that he's applying for. And under experienced in terms of what could be shown on a resume. So it's just like this weird limbo. And he's not the only one. And I'm going to share some of his work. He, for fun, Walmart had released a paper about their search algorithm, and he noticed some technical issues with it. And he created one of the most masterful presentations I've ever seen, showing how applying different techniques would yield significant benefits. And this is actually significant because it's Walmart and it's search for their autocomplete. So it's not like it's a significant problem. It's anyway, it's just one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. And I'm going to post some links to that. His handle is Valadark. But this is a guy that if I were hiring, I would totally want him on my team. I wouldn't be able to use him to his full capacity, but I totally want him on the team. And I've done a little bit of work with him on a side project and was very satisfied. But anyway, and I know other people like this. I know several other people that do not have jobs right now that are top tier engineers. They are on the top shelf. They are the people that I would want to hire, and they cannot find work. And this is the strangest thing in the world to me. So anyway, the pick there was more than anything else is that the Walmart paper, and then, I actually didn't link to the correct, let me see if I can link to this correctly. Boop. Go link to this. Boop, boop. Okay, there we are. That's the correct link for the other piece there. And then also, since we're all alone now and it's just me and no one else can be blamed, my other pick is going to be, I kind of want to couch this. I kind of want to don't, I don't know, but I don't know if this is going to come out before the election. I think it will. I don't think our lead times on the episodes are that long right now. I have to go back and check, but I would encourage everybody to reconsider what you think you know. No, I don't even want you to reconsider what you think you know. What I want for people to do, what would make me so incredibly happy is if, just one person goes out there and looks up actual source videos. Take the person that your hate is targeted towards. Go look up the source videos and see what that person actually says for the whole sentence. Because I've seen some, I don't know if it's AI generated or what, but I've seen some content that's not parody content. That's actual content that's being put out there that is removing words like not from the video and then being, recycled into, I think a lot of people have some very wrong misconceptions about particular events and particular things that have been said, and particular, like a lot of the particulars are very, very skewed. So whatever your greatest bias is against or for your candidate, go just watch the video and watch like the whole 60-second clip, the 30 seconds before, the 30 seconds after of what they're actually saying, and see if it lines up with what you believe that you have been taught that they are saying. Because I guarantee you, for many of you, if you do that, no matter which side you're on, you are going to have your eyes opened, and it might open up enough to cause some reconsideration. I do think that this election is very strange. I think there's a lot of anomalies that have led up to it. I think that something is wrong in the U.S. system right now. I think it's dangerously wrong. And, if you want to make a quick buck, Elon has announced a program on Twitter where you can make money by registering people to vote. And as far as I know, I don't think that there's a stipulation on that they have to be for a particular candidacy. The position is a freedom of speech position, but I don't believe that you have to subscribe to a particular candidate in order to take advantage of that offer. So basically, $47 million is up for grabs. That's $47 per registration is up for grabs for anybody who goes through whatever online tool they have, inviting, it becomes the referral for the registration or something like that. I don't know all the details, but I think anyway, so I put that out there. So with that all said, thanks for tuning in. I hope that this was a good episode. I hope that that this has a positive impact overall. I know I did a little bit of ranting there and whatnot, but I hope this is a positive impact overall. And y'all have a good one. I'll catch you later. Adios.